Chapter 1895. I have a younger brother. Words could not begin to describe how agitated Fan Xiaoshu felt at that very moment. He had guessed that Zhong Xian was an ancient sage, but he did not think that the other party would be that powerful among the ancient sages. After all, if the other party was truly that powerful, there should not have been any need for the other party to borrow his identity in order to get into the great frontistery of Confucianism. But at that very moment, the sheer might he produced seemed to be too great for even the heavens to contain. It was as if he was a being that had risen above the rules of the world. Peng peng peng. As the two of them crossed blows with one another, lacerations emerged one after another in the sky. The folded space containing the great frontistery of Confucianism was placed under huge strain, and it seemed as if the entire folded space would collapse at any moment. He's Zhong Xian? You actually competed with him back then? Zhong Qing gulped down a mouthful of saliva as he turned to look at Nangong Yuanfeng. Back then, he passed himself off as a member of the Luo clan, assuming the name of Luo Tianya. However, based on what I heard afterward, he's indeed Zhong Xian. Nangong Yuanfeng nodded as he could not help but tremble in the face of Zhong Xian's incredible might. It had at most been just a few months since he had last seen the young man, right? When in the world did he become so powerful? Not even the great ancient sage Yang Qing possessed such tremendous strength. If this was the power that the young man had wielded back then, he could have been killed with just a simple flick of the young man's finger. It seemed like the young man had truly been merciful to him. Sila. In his moment of shock, the fighting duo had already torn through the space of the great frontistery of Confucianism and vanished from sight. The next moment, the two of them were standing above a vast mountain range. Over there, the examinees who had just cleared the test were trying their best to decipher the formation on the jade tokens that they had been given when a loud rumble suddenly echoed in the sky. They raised their heads, and they were welcomed with a sight that they would never forget in their entire life. Two experts bathed in lightning were clashing intensely with one another. Every strike from them made the entire world tremble. It was almost as if the end of the world had arrived. One of them had a head completely bathed in crimson blood, and he had a frenzied expression on his face that looked as if he would blow up from all of the rage that he had accumulated within. On the other hand, the other young man had a composed smile on his lips, and he brandished the sword in his grasp with grace. Are the two of them ancient sages? There's probably no one in the world who commands such tremendous strength other than the ancient sages. But why would the two ancient sages be fighting with one another? It looks as if they are fighting one another to the death. I don't know either. They might have some grudge with one another. A huge commotion broke out beneath. With fists clenched tightly by their sides, the examinees stared at the majestic battle unfolding before them with envy in their eyes. This was what they had been cultivating all their lives for. From the moment they took the first whiff of spiritual energy into their body and converted it into zhenqi, it had already become their lifelong pursuit to acquire greater strength. The tremendous strength that was right before their eyes could be said to be their terminal goal. It represented the top of the world to them. Don't you dare hurt our teacher. At this moment, two voices reverberated in the air before two youths younger than them rushed into the air. The lightning in the air immediately became even more intense. Astonishingly, the person with his head bathed in blood was able to stand his ground even when faced with three opponents simultaneously. After crossing several blows, the two youths who had just joined the fray were sent crashing to the ground. You aren't a match for him, so don't come over anymore. Don't worry, leave him to me, Zhong Xian said. At the same time, he flicked his wrist and leaped into a dimension rift, disappearing from sight. Where do you think you're going? The deity immediately chased after Zhong Xian, determined not to allow the latter get away. Just like that, the two of them vanished from sight. If not for the countless lacerations in space left in the sky as a result of their fight, they would have thought that everything that they had seen a moment ago was just a dream. You said that they are very likely powerful experts. The head of the stone village looked at the village bell, Xiao are you, and he shook his head. How could that be possible? If they are really as powerful as you've made them out to be, do you think that it's possible for them to maintain such politeness with us and even offer to compensate us for the losses in our fields? It was as if the village bell's mind had not been working right ever since she returned from the short journey with those three guests. As soon as she returned, she had gone around telling everyone that the 3 guests that had been there not too long ago were actually Saint Realm experts. Of course, there was no one in the stone village who would believe such ludicrous news. There was no way that a Saint Realm expert would be so courteous to them, going to the extent of offering to compensate for their losses. Besides, if they were really Saint Realm experts, they could have just flown all the way to Fan City. Why would they waste their time riding on Shoayu's tamed aerial spirit beast? In their view, Saint Realm experts were domineering and authoritative. They were beings so far above them that even crossing them would have warranted the death penalty. They simply could not imagine an amiable Saint Realm cultivator. It's true. Why won't any of you believe me? I saw them flying in the sky without any external support with my own eyes, and they flew at an incredible speed. Shoayu exclaimed in exasperation. It was so frustrating to see everyone acting as if she was blabbering gibberish. She was certain that she had seen the 3 of them vanishing right before her eyes. While she had found it unbelievable at first, she was convinced that they were definitely Saint Realm expert. Had she known that they were Saint Realm experts right from the start, she would not have acted so haughtily. Instead, she would have humbly asked for their guidance in her cultivation. I know that you have great ambitions in mind, but Saint Realm experts only exist within major clans. People like us will never get a chance to see them at all. The village head sighed deeply as he tried to console Shoayu. But at that very moment, the deafening rumbling of thunder filled the air. Everyone quickly raised their heads, and what came into their sights were 2 figures shrouded in lightning. They were crossing blows intensely with one another, and every strike they dashed out tore the fabric of space apart, causing dark rifts to appear all around the surroundings. Isn't that young man? Recognizing one of the 2 figures in the sky, the villagers widened their eyes in shock. It was certain that the young man equipped with a spear fighting in the air was the person whom they had welcomed into their village not too long ago. The village bell had just said that they could very well be Saint Realm experts, and they had thought that it was ridiculous. But what they were witnessing had already far exceeded what saints or even great sages could achieve. Achoo! He is actually an ancient sage. The village head felt his throat turning dry as he spoke. Even though they were only ordinary villagers who were unqualified to cultivate, they did hear a fair bit about the various cultivation realms and the strength that they commanded. Not even the esteemed great sages in the top echelon of the 100 schools of philosophers could summon such tremendous might. The young man in the sky was definitely an ancient sage, and a very powerful one at that. I actually journeyed together with an ancient sage. But not only did I neglect to learn from him, I even scorned him. The village belle, Shoayu, nearly burst into tears at the realization. For the longest time, she had desired to acquire higher cultivation techniques to advance her cultivation, but when the opportunity presented itself, she had actually allowed it to slip through her fingers due to her arrogance. Even though she was highly regarded in the village, she knew that someone of her caliber would never be able to catch the sight of an ancient sage. In an instant, her guts turned green from regret. On that very day, almost everyone in the 100 schools of philosophers witnessed the intense fight in the sky between those 2 top experts, and their silhouettes were imprinted deep in their minds. Even tens of thousands of years later, the incident would remain an undying legend. Why can't I find anywhere that's empty? Zhongxian frowned with a troubled look on his face. He did not run about just to show off his strength. It was just that he was unable to find a sufficiently remote place to release all of his finishers at once. The world that the 100 schools of philosophers lived in was simply too crowded. He did not like the idea of exposing his trump cards even to his own comrades. Thus, he could only continuously retreat while fending the deity off. Some time later, they finally arrived at a relatively empty mountain range. Finally, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed like effort did pay off in the end. He quickly threw down a bunch of formation flags and sealed the surroundings so as to prevent his aura from leaking out. Oh, you aren't going to run anymore? I assume that you have resigned yourself to your fate, the deity scoffed when he saw that the young man was not escaping anymore. He had not been blindly chasing Zhongxian around. During his pursuit, he had been able to fully ascertain the extent of Zhongxian's abilities, and he was confident that he would be able to kill the latter easily as long as the latter stopped running away. Resigned myself to my fate. Aren't you jumping too quickly to conclusions? Well, it just happens that I have a twin brother who wishes to meet you. As Zhongxian said those words, he flicked his wrist. Who? A figure identical to Zhongxian appeared right next to him. Chapter 1896 Slaying a Deity Twin Brother? Seeing the appearance of another figure with an identical appearance and soul aura, the deity was stunned for a moment before a knowing smile crept onto his lips. This is your clone, right? Spectacularly made, I must say. For a clone to possess strength identical to the main body, it must have been made using some kind of invaluable material. Wonderful, I shall claim it for myself. There were cultivators in the Azure who created their own clones to augment their fighting prowess, but most of them were just look-alike puppets that were similar to the main body in form. The clone that was standing right before him actually possessed a unique soul. This meant that the material used to create the clone was of extremely high quality, even by the standards of the Azure. If he could acquire such a treasure for himself and forge his own clone, his fighting prowess would effectively double in an instant. With reddened eyes, he pointed at the clone in front of him and spoke with quivering lips. From this day forth, you shall be mine as well. Boom. Torrential energy poured out toward Zhongxian's clone, but before it could even reach the latter, the deity saw a blur in his field of vision. Before he knew it, the clone was already standing in front of him, and a leg was flying toward his face. With a haughty look on his face, the clone demanded, "Who the hell are you? The likes of you actually think that you would be able to tame me? You!" With twitching lips, the deity swiftly grabbed the clone's leg to stop the attack when the latter's other leg came flying from the opposite direction. Peng! Just like that, the deity was knocked back as his cheekbone sunk inward from the powerful impact. What? How is this possible? The deity was stunned by the earlier strike. It was not due to the damage that he had sustained but by the sheer disbelief at how powerful the kick had been. The clones that he had seen thus far had always been weaker than the main body, but why would this person's clone be even stronger than the main body itself? How in the world did this even work? It was illogical. You sure make a huge fuss out of nothing. My main body is a weakling, so how could he begin to compare to me? The clone smirked as he charged toward the deity once more, whipping his leg over at a terrifying speed. As Zhongxian had been suppressing his cultivation, he was still at sempiternal realm consummation. However, it was different for the clone. As a god artifact, there was no need for him to suppress his cultivation at all. A month ago, he had already pushed for a breakthrough to Ancient Sage using the Eon of Ancient Sage, making him a full-fledged blood reincarnation realm expert. Even when they were in the same cultivation realm, Zhongxian was no match for his clone, let alone the fact that there was a gap of 3 entire realms between them. If Zhongxian had a fight with his clone, he would barely be able to protect himself with the Dragonbone Divine Spear in hand. Slowly, the surprised look on the deity warped into feverish excitement as he began laughing maniacally. Ha 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 ha. The heavens are really shining on me. Now I am more determined than ever to make you mine. With a piercing cry, he leaped forward to meet the clone's attack. He gathered all of his strength together in order to suppress this show-off of a clone once and for all when a shadow was suddenly cast over him. He hurriedly retreated in alarm before looking upward. It was a massive book. Following which, a pitch-black palm shot out from the book and darted right for his face. Pa! This strike caused him to spin around twice on the spot as fresh blood spewed all over the area. What the heck is this? The deity was a little astonished by all of the trump cards that Zhongxian had up his sleeves. Just what other things did the other party have in store? First the spear, the sword, and the brick, and shortly after, the clone, and now, a book was joining the battle. More importantly, he could sense incredible pulsations of energy coming from within the book. There was some kind of existence that possessed strength comparable to him sealed within. Who? In that moment of astonishment, Zhongxian charged forward with a spear in his left hand and a sword in his right hand. Brandishing the 2 weapons with surprising coordination, he was actually able to throw the deity into a fluster for a brief moment through the bizarre combination of attacks. Meanwhile, his clone and Vicious quickly rushed forward to further pressure the deity. Peng 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 peng. Under the relentless assault, it did not take long for the deity to be struck by several hundred times, and the impact sustained caused his bones to shatter and internal organs to shift. There was not a spot on his body that remained unharmed. No, this can't be happening. For the first time throughout the entire battle, the deity tasted fear. He had rushed over when he noticed the weakening of the dimension barrier because he had thought that he would be able to acquire some rare treasures, but who could have known that he would end up being cornered in this lower dimension? Even Zhongxian himself was already a tricky opponent to deal with, let alone having to simultaneously cope with another two experts who boasted strength similar to his. How could he win against such a lineup? In the depths of his heart, the deity began to despair. He knew that he could not allow the battle to continue any further. He had to escape. Thus, he gathered all of his energy seemingly with the intention to launch a desperate counterattack, causing the other three to immediately go on the defensive. However, it was, in fact, a feint. With no one tying him down, he immediately turned tail and ran away. However, before he could get far, the world suddenly turned dark. He barely had time to glance upward before a massive brick crushed down on his head once more. It was as if this fellow had been biding his time in the sky all along, waiting for the ideal opportunity to smash his face. Peng! While this smash did not deal a fatal blow to the deity, it did throw him off for a moment. This momentary lapse in attention turned out to be his undoing. The next instant, a spear and a sword pierced through his chest. Right after, a fist smashed right into his head, and a black hand stabbed into his heart. Putong! Even down to his last breath, there was an incredulous look on the deity's face, as if he could not believe that a superior being like him had been defeated by mere ants. As the last breath escaped his lips, his body grew limp, and he began plummeting from the sky. It would be a waste to leave the blood and body of an expert of such caliber lying around, Zhongxian thought as he quickly stowed the corpse of the deity into the myriad ant-hive nest. Following which, he heaved a deep sigh of relief. The battle was finally over. No matter what, the enemy that he had faced was a true Dimension Shatterer realm expert. Had he made any mistakes over the course of the battle, he would have been destroyed in an instant. As such, he had pushed his concentration to its very limits throughout the entire duration. Nevertheless, the rewards from the battle were well worth the fight. The deity's blood and body would surely prove vital for his breakthrough to Ancient Sage in the future. Placing his clone and Vicious back into the myriad ant-hive nest, Zhongxian turned his sight to the mountain range where the void was and stared silently for a moment before making his way back. On the elevated platform in the midst of the mountain range, Ancient Sage Yang Qing finally struggled to his feet. He looked at the massive rifts around him with a worried look on his face. At that moment, Kong Shiyaro suddenly flew over and asked, "Ancient Sage Yang Qing, was that young man the celestial master teacher you previously mentioned, Zhongxian?" Having overexerted her bloodline ability, her face was horrifyingly pale as well. It took everything she had just to maintain her flight. "That's right," Ancient Sage Yang Qing replied with a nod. "He's truly an extraordinary individual." Kong Shiyaro nodded in awe. She had been blessed with a powerful bloodline at birth, so there had been no one who was able to compete with her in terms of talent. She had been confident that there was no one beneath Ancient Sage who would be stronger than her, but from the earlier battle, it was clear that the young man's fighting prowess exceeded even hers. Ever since she heard of Zhongxian's existence, she had been wanting to meet and compete with him. She had thought that she could have a duel with him after achieving a breakthrough to Ancient Sage. However, from the looks of it, there was no need for that. Even after using her bloodline ability, she had been unable to stop the deity's movements. On the other hand, the young man was able to battle the deity on equal footing and even lure him away. It was apparent from this that there was a gap between their abilities. There's no denying that Zhongxian is formidable, but he's still lacking in comparison to the deity from the Azure. "I fear that he's in peril," one of the ancient sages remarked worriedly. "Given our current condition, there's nothing we can do to help him. Even stabilizing the formation is impossible for us at the moment." The ancient sages had already been reduced to a skeletal rack at the moment, and they would die soon enough without any eon of Ancient Sage to replenish his energy. Given their states, there was nothing that they could do to help. Knowing this, Ancient sage Yang Qing also shook his head. While the deity had been lured away by Zhongxian, it did not mean that the danger was over. The formation that was sustained by ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse had been opened, and the mercury-like energy was rapidly pouring in. If they did not seal the rifts quickly, everyone in the Kungsu domain would soon die from taking in that incredibly heavy energy. Their entire populace was at stake. It's fortunate that this energy doesn't diffuse too quickly due to its weight. What's more urgent is for us to get rid of that deity, or else anything we do will be futile, Kong Shiyaro said. As long as they sealed their acupoints, they would be able to bear with the mercury-like energy in the short term. However, as long as the deity remained alive, his existence would be like a guillotine hanging right above them, ready to snap down at any moment. You're right. Even at the cost of our lives, we must eradicate that deity. Everyone nodded grimly in agreement. Gathering the last bits of their strength, they were going to move in the direction that Zhongxian had disappeared in when a young man approached with a nonchalant look on his face. He was dressed in a clean white robe that was completely devoid of dust. There was no hint of blood or wounds on his body, making it seem as if he had left earlier not to battle but to go on a leisurely holiday. Who else could that young man be other than Zhongxian? Why you refine? What happened to the deity? Did you kill him? Everyone asked anxiously. Chapter 1897 Repairing the Formation. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine, Zhongxian replied with a smile. As for the deity, you need not worry about him anymore. On his way here, he had washed himself with clear water to quickly clean up a little before switching into a fresh set of clothes. Even though he had not sustained any injuries, he had sweated a fair bit over the course of the battle, and the feeling of fabric clinging stickily to his skin felt very uncomfortable to him. Time ticked by in silence. It was quite a while before the crowd was able to take in the news that the young man had successfully gotten rid of the deity, and looks of awe appeared on their faces. To defeat a person so powerful without sustaining any injuries, the young man was frighteningly powerful. Taking a deep breath to recover from his shock, ancient sage Yang Qing took a look at the rifts around him before looking at Zhongxian with an awkward expression on his face. Zhongshe, I understand that you have unique insights into formations, so may I trouble you to mend our formation for us? He knew that the current 100 schools of philosophers lacked the ability to mend the shattered formation, but the young man before him should be able to pull it off. It was just that the young man was an outsider, and the relations between them could not be said to be amicable. Furthermore, it was just a moment ago that the young man had done them a huge favor by luring away the deity and getting rid of him despite the risks, so he could not help but feel a little embarrassed for relying so much on the other party. It's no trouble at all, but do you have the blueprint and repair method for the formation? Zhongxian asked. This was the first time that he had seen a formation like this. Using the corpse of ancient sage Zi Yuan as its core to seal the passageway leading to a higher dimension, its complexity was way beyond any of the formations that he had seen before. Even he would have had difficulties trying to set it up without the blueprint. We do, ancient sage Yang Qing replied as he passed a jade token over. Recorded in here is the structure of the formation, as well as the notes that generations of our predecessors have made while repairing the formation. Taking the jade token, Zhongxian quickly scanned through its contents. It did not take long for him to have the entire formation in his grasp. The name of this formation was very literal, Floating Coffin Heaven Mending Formation. It was said to have been created by Kongsha himself in order to seal up the passageway linking the higher dimension to their world. Once it was in place, even Dimension Shatterer realm cultivators would have trouble trying to breach it. Is he going to attempt to mend the formation after learning it on the spot? Could it be that his talents in his supporting occupation are on par with mine? Is he able to master anything within moments of coming into contact with it, too? Kong Shiyaro frowned in intrigue. Possessing the purest bloodline of Kong Shi, her ability to absorb new information was amazing. Be it for a supporting occupation or a battle technique, she could understand and master it swiftly after learning the principles behind it. She did not have to devote too much time to refining her skills. It was bewildering to her how the young man had the confidence to accept their request without any hesitation despite having never seen the formation before. It could not be that he possessed the same talents as her, could it? But even if he has talents comparable to mine, such a complex formation should at least take him 2 to 3 days to master. Will he be able to make it in time at this rate? Kong Shiyaro thought worriedly as she looked at the mercury-like energy gushing in from the rifts. Recalling the fact that the young man was a celestial master teacher just like Kongsha, it should not come as any surprise that the young man was extraordinary. However, there were still limits to what a human could achieve within a limited time frame. The floating coffin heaven-mending formation was so complicated that it had taken her 3 days before she was able to grasp how the entire system worked. Even if the young man was more gifted and could grasp new information 2 times swifter than her, he still would not be able to mend the formation in time. The mercury-like energy had only suffused the elevated platform that they were on, but at the current rate it was flowing out, it would drown at least a third of the Kungsu domain's land by the end of the day. That would cause a rapid change in the quality of the spiritual energy within the world, and the green sprout wheat that they had cultivated with great difficulty would swiftly die off. Everything that the 100 schools of philosophers had built up over the past tens of thousands of years would be reduced to nothing. Then, everything would be for naught even if they did manage to repair the formation. Besides, they were betting on the possibility that the young man would have some way to repair it, but that was unjustified optimism on their part. It could be said that making this request to the young man was really a last-ditch gamble. But as Kong Shiyaro continued looking on worriedly, she saw Zhongxian passing the jade token back to her. Following which, he turned to the crowd with a confident smile on his face. "I'm going to begin the repairs now, so please step back." Hearing those words, Kong Shiyaro blinked blankly. She raised her right hand and swiftly counted 3 breaths. Had he really grasped the formation in just 3 breaths? Under her bewildered stare, the young man began moving. He opened his fingers wide and pumped his junchi toward the sky like a rapid current, swiftly forming illusory bridges of a myriad colors across the void. Standing in the very middle of those seemingly divine bridges, Zhongxian looked as if he was the ruler of the world. He gently moved his finger to maneuver those illusory bridges, reminiscent of a demonic tunist performing a moving melody. Along with his movements, a faint but beautiful humming from the wind could be heard. "Is that the voice of the heavens?" Kong Shiyaro trembled. Legend had it that if anyone achieved the level of perfect harmony with the heavens, no matter which occupation they were from, the voice of the heavens would emerge. The young man had only browsed through the blueprint for 3 breaths, but not only did he manage to grasp the formation perfectly, he was even able to elevate it to a much higher level. Was she really so lacking compared to him? But she was the descendant of the legendary Kongsha, possessing a bloodline that none could match. With deep indignation, she looked on and saw Zhongxian's fingers moving faster and faster, and it did not take long for after-images to appear in the midst of his movements. The illusory bridges danced elegantly in the air, crossing one another to swiftly form an intricate design. His speeding up. Isn't he afraid of making a mistake? Kong Shiyaro shuddered at the sheer speed that Zhongxian was moving at. Given the complexity of the formation, she had thought that even if Zhongxian could comprehend it, he would need their help to form the primary structure to seal off the inflow of the mercury-like energy before slowly reinforcing it. All in all, she had expected the entire process to take a whole month. However, at that moment, Zhongxian's hands were moving so quickly that she could hardly keep up with them anymore. If he made a single mistake, not only would his previous work be unraveled, he would also suffer a severe backlash from the formation. A few breaths passed, but not only did Zhongxian's movements not slow down, they continued still to grow swifter. Unable to stand the tension any longer, Kong Shiyaro flicked her wrist and took out a mirror. She gently reflected it against Zhongxian. This mirror was a family heirloom passed down in the Kong clan, and it was known as the profound Empyrean mirror. Through analyzing the intensity of the pulsations of energy coming from the formation, it was able to determine whether the formation master's movements were correct or not. If the formation master's movements were correct, the characters, correct, would be reflected in the mirror, and a white light would emanate from its surface. Incorrect, and the characters, wrong, would be reflected, with black light emanating from its surface. Wung wung wung. Upon reflecting Zhongxian's silhouette, the profound Empyrean mirror immediately emanated a brilliant white glow as lines and lines of characters swiftly flowed across its surface. Correct. 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 As the profound Empyrean mirror in her hand got filled up with the characters, correct, its surface glowed so brightly that it seemed to become a mini sun that blinded everyone in the surroundings. This. Kong Xiao's lips quivered in disbelief. She had seen plenty of geniuses in her lifetime, and she was one herself. But to master such a complex formation within 3 breaths and repair it so quickly without making the slightest mistake, was that young man really a human? Who? Her astonishment did not last for long before the fingers of the young man in the air came to an abrupt halt. He gracefully placed his hands behind his back before gazing into the void. What's wrong? The formation's repairs mustn't be halted halfway through, or else you will have to start anew. Kong Xiao yelled anxiously. The formation was not just complex, the repairs must also be finished at a single go. Otherwise, if there was even a momentary interruption in between, the mercury-like energy would swiftly crush everything that had been built thus far. This was similar to repairing a dam. One had to finish the repairs in a single shot, or else any weakness in the structure would swiftly be exploited by the accumulated water, eventually resulting in a leakage. I didn't halt the repairs halfway. Hearing those words, Zhongxian glanced at Kong Xiao and replied, I have already finished the repairs. You have already finished? Kong Xiao was taken aback. Given that ancient sage Zi Yuan's body was still with her and the mercury-like energy was still flowing through, how could this be considered as a completed repair job? Noticing Kong Xiao's incomprehension, Zhongxian chuckled softly. He looked at the void above once and commanded, activate. Hong Long. The coffin beside Kong Xiao immediately soared into the void and vanished, and the surrounding space was swiftly stabilized. All of the rifts were mended in an instant, and it looked as if nothing had happened there at all. The formation had actually activated under his command. The word of law. Isn't that the Kong clan's bloodline ability? Kong Xiao could not believe what she was seeing. Chapter 1898. The prowess of the otherworldly demonic tribe to be able to repair the formation with a single word. Could it be that the other party possessed the same bloodline as her, allowing him to use the word of law ability? But very soon, Kong Xiao realized that was not the case. While the move that Zhongxian had used appeared similar to the word of law, there were some differences between the two. To be more exact, it was a more advanced use of the impartation of heaven's will. However, this floating coffin heaven-mending formation harnessed the energies of the heavens, so even activating it manually was extremely grueling. How could it possibly be so easily swayed by the impartation of heaven's will? Ancient sage Yang Qing, who harbored the same doubts in his mind, swiftly posed the question to Zhongxian. Well, the formation blueprint you gave me had quite a few problems, so I made some corrections while I was setting up the formation, Zhongxian replied with a smile. Corrections? Kong Xiao's body froze in shock. That's not possible. This formation was created by Kong Xia himself, so there's no way there could have been any flaws in it. How could there be any imperfections in the things left behind by Kong Xia? Well, the formation that Kong Xia created didn't have any flaws. The problems originated from the huge changes in the Kungsu domain in the past tens of thousands of years. The formation that Kong Xia created is no longer optimal given the current environment in the Kungsu domain. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to keep repairing it generation after generation, Zhongxian said. There was nothing in the world that time could not erode. Without a doubt, the Kungsu domain from tens of thousands of years back was bound to have been very different from what they saw before them. Since even the world had changed, how could formations remain flawless without adapting to the changes? Those words rendered Kong Xiao speechless as shock swept through her mind once more. The young man's words did make perfect sense, but this was Kong Xia's formation they were talking about. The young man had actually modified Kong Xia's formation. Furthermore, he had even succeeded in doing so. Kong Xiao felt as if the world was whirling around her. All along, she had never doubted her own talent. She had felt that there was nothing that she was incapable of as long as she gave it her all. However, compared to the monster before her, she felt like she could sprint for her entire life and never catch up with him. On the other hand, seeing that the mercury-like energy had been completely sealed away, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He turned his gaze away from the stupefied Kong Shiyaro to the relatively calmer ancient sage Yang Qing and said, "I guess the situation is stable for the time being." Ancient sage Yang Qing. May I trouble you to explain the situation to me? He felt like Kong Shiyaro was making a huge fuss out of nothing. It was as if she had never seen the larger world out there before. Taking 20 breaths to set up this formation was really no remarkable feat at all. If anything, it was rather slow. If he had achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage, such a thing would not have taken him 2 breaths. Zhongshe, what do you think of that heavy energy from earlier? Do you think that you will be able to absorb and assimilate it into your body? Ancient sage Yang Qing replied with another question. Zhongshen pondered for a moment before replying. The heavy energy shares some commonalities with spiritual energy, but its sheer weight makes it impossible for anyone from the master-teacher continent to absorb. If I absorb it, the chances are that my meridians will collapse as a result of the weight. Hearing those words, ancient sage Yang Qing sighed deeply before saying with a bitter smile, "I see. To be honest with you, that heavy energy is the spiritual energy from the azure." Spiritual energy from the azure. That's right. Have you ever wondered why the beings from the azure are so much more powerful than us? That's because the spiritual energy they absorb is very different from ours. It's much more condensed, and being constantly exposed to it has tempered their constitution to the point that even their younglings wield tremendous fighting prowess at birth. Ancient sage Yang Qing explained. They actually absorb that heavy spiritual energy. Is it really all right for them to do so? Zhongshen was stunned. Even with his blood reincarnation realm prowess, he felt as if his internal organs would be crushed if he absorbed just a bit of it. Were the natives of the azure really able to absorb such heavy energy without suffering any backlash? Follow me. Seeing the look on Zhongshen's face, ancient sage Yang Qing turned around and beckoned Zhongshen to come along with him. Gritting his teeth to endure the frailty he felt, he headed off in a certain direction. He had lost too much blood in the earlier battle, such that he had nearly expended all of his vitality. Even though he was still breathing, he did not have much time left. The two of them flew for quite a while before arriving at a tightly sealed palace. Ancient sage Yang Qing pushed open the door of the palace and walked in. There was an isolation formation within the palace, and in the isolation formation was a massive metal cage. Zhongshen could not quite tell what material it was made of, but there were runic inscriptions all over it. 2 youths were imprisoned in the metal cage. Upon seeing ancient sage Yang Qing, their eyes immediately narrowed in fury. If they could, there was no doubt that they would have killed ancient sage Yang Qing. Zhongshen swiftly assessed the 2 youths and noticed that they were both sempiternal realm consummation experts, just a step away from reaching ancient sage. In terms of disposition and strength, they did not pale in comparison to Yang Shui. "Why did you lock them inside the cage?" Zhongshen asked doubtfully. While the 100 schools of philosophers had strayed from Kongshi's ideal of education without discrimination, Zhongshen could tell that they were not the type to harm others without any justification. Could those 2 have committed some kind of heinous crime? "Zhongshe, are you able to tell who they are?" Ancient sage Yang Qing asked. Hearing that question, Zhongshen frowned. Based on the other party's words, it seemed like he was expected to know these 2 youths, so he took a closer look at them. However, he was still unable to figure out their identities, so he eventually shook his head. "They are otherworldly demons," ancient sage Yang Qing replied. Those words made Zhongshen freeze on the spot. "They are otherworldly demons. How can that be? Could it be that they are otherworldly demon emperors in disguise?" The otherworldly demon's Junchi of slaughter was so overpowering that it was impossible to disregard it. The 2 youths standing before him were releasing no killing intent at all, so how could they be otherworldly demons? Could it be that they were otherworldly demon emperors who had used some kind of special means to disguise themselves? But that should not be either. Except for Luo Ruoxin's disguise amulet, there was no disguise that had been able to escape his eye of insight thus far. He was certain that the 2 youths before him were not disguised, they were in their natural form. "I know that you have your doubts, but they are really otherworldly demons. They absorbed the heavy energy earlier and turned into their current states," ancient sage Yang Qing replied. "This." Zhong Xian's body shook in astonishment. He was still wondering whether that mercury-like energy could be absorbed or not, but it turned out that it was so powerful that it could even turn otherworldly demons into humans. Was this for real? Who? Without explaining himself, ancient sage Yang Qing stepped forward and flicked his wrist. The mercury-like energy from the elevated platform earlier immediately gushed toward the two youths in the cage. In response to the arrival of this unique energy, the two youths did not show the slightest hint of fear. Instead, their eyes lit up in excitement as they swiftly sat down, opened their acupoints, and absorbed the energy. As the energy flowed into their bodies, it immediately began to billow like boiling water. Their aura and energies swiftly grew more and more condensed. It's really possible, Zhong Xian thought as he clenched his fists tightly together. The otherworldly demons were actually able to absorb the mercury-like energy that even he was unable to absorb, and it increased their rate of cultivation a frightening degree. He immediately turned to ancient sage Yang Qing, hoping to receive answers about this curious observation from the other party. This has something to do with one's innate constitution. As long as one's innate constitution is sufficiently strong, one will be able to adapt to the heavy energy and assimilate it into one's body. The innate constitution of the otherworldly demons is far stronger than that of humans. Just the fact that they are blessed with the strength of a transcendental mortal at birth speaks volumes. Nevertheless, of the 10 I have experimented on, these are the only 2 survivors, ancient sage Yang Qing said. Furthermore, I have tested this on over 10,000 men over the past year, but none of them survived in the end. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian's face warped in horror. What he was horrified by was not ancient sage Yang Qing's callousness but the significance of what he had just said. He had thought that while otherworldly demons had a head start in front of humans due to their innate constitution, they would be on equal footing with one another in the later stages. However, it seemed like the rift was much wider than he had thought. If this mercury-like energy one day covered the entire master-teacher continent, would mankind not go extinct and the otherworldly demons rise in power? Alarmed by this notion, Zhong Xian asked, "Is this why Kongsha used ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse to create that massive formation to block the dimension passageway? Is it all to prevent the heavy energy from leaking into this world?" Chapter 1899 The Origin of Eon of Ancient Sage. That's right. Ancient sage Yang Qing nodded in response. When Kongsha first noticed the Kungsu domain, it was nothing more than an ordinary passageway between the master-teacher continent and the Azure. The heavy energy that lingered in it wasn't too great then, but he swiftly realized that while humans would quickly lose their lives upon absorbing it, there was a chance that otherworldly demons could survive the assimilation of the energy and become tremendously stronger as a result of that. That was also how Vicious came about. In order to prevent mankind from being destroyed, ancient sage Zi Yuan willingly gave up his life to become the crux of the floating coffin heaven-mending formation that we have now. Nodding in realization, Zhong Xian recalled another thing that he had noticed in the Kungsu domain and asked, "What about the green sprout wheat and the superior constitution of the ordinary populace?" Knowing what Zhong Xian was asking, ancient sage Yang Qing replied, "After years of research, Kongsha found that the main reason why there was a chance for some otherworldly demons to survive the assimilation of the heavy energy was due to their superior innate constitution. This realization highlighted the importance of enhancing the average constitution of humans, but Kongsha knew very well that the enhancement of an entire race's constitution was bound to be a long battle. It's impossible to make significant advancement within a short period of time. One of the key factors that Kongsha identified that would effectively enhance the constitution of an entire race was their diet. As such, he entrusted ancient sage Zi Kai and his descendants with the responsibility of developing a crop that could achieve this effect. After many years of trial and error, they eventually successfully nurtured the green sprout wheat. This crop has the effect of continuously cleansing and enhancing one's constitution, and after tens of thousands of years of nourishment, there was indeed significant growth in the constitution of the 100 schools of philosophers. Unfortunately, we are still a long way off from matching the constitution of the otherworldly demonic tribe, and we are still unable to directly absorb the heavy energy. Zhong Xian nodded in enlightenment. The doubts that he had harbored previously had all been cleared up. It was no wonder the 100 schools of philosophers had suddenly disappeared from the master-teacher continent. It turned out that they had devoted themselves to protecting the seal in the Kungsu domain so as to prevent the mercury-like energy from leaking out. At the same time, they viewed it as their mission to nurture stronger humans. Once those in the Kungsu domain were able to adapt to the mercury-like energy, their strength would grow by leaps and bounds. Their means might have been different from the master-teacher continent, but their ultimate goal was the same: the development of mankind. Ancient sage Yang Qing continued on. The Kungsu domain is a small world, and the resources that it contains are severely limited. Furthermore, with the strengthening of the average constitution of the general populace, the spiritual energy that we require is growing significantly too. As such, we have no choice but to limit the qualifications to cultivate to just a selected few. This is also why we have so many tests and trials in place. We can only afford to invest our resources in talents who have the potential to reach the top. While ancient sage Yang Qing mentioned that the Kungsu domain was a small world, that was only in relative comparison with the master-teacher continent. Its scale comfortably exceeded that of any of the major empires on the master-teacher continent. However, in order to nurture the green sprout wheat properly, the Kungsu domain had to seal off its connection to the master-teacher continent. Thus, it carried the risk of its spiritual energy drying up should there be too many cultivators. In a sense, the Kungsu domain was similar to a greenhouse. No matter how huge the greenhouse was, it could not reach the same level of self-sufficiency as the external world to provide nourishment for any number of plants. In Zhong Xian's previous world, a scientist had once set up a massive greenhouse and placed countless plants, animals, and insects within it as an experiment. However, within less than a year, the entire habitat had completely collapsed. Such was the case for Kungsu domain. Unlike the master-teacher continent, it did not have the ability to fully regulate itself, and the nourishment required to bestow even ordinary humans with the strength of the Zhongsha realm put a huge burden on it. So, it was inevitable that they had to limit the number of cultivators. Otherwise, it was likely that the Kungsu domain would first collapse before its people could adapt to the mercury-like spiritual energy from the azure. I believe that you might have noticed it already, but this problem isn't just limited to the Kungsu domain. The master-teacher continent is still safe for the time being, but it'll face the same threat in the future. As the number of cultivators increases, there'll eventually come a day when the spiritual energy dries up, ancient sage Yang Qing remarked. Zhong Xian nodded in response. No matter how big or enriching an environment or habitat was, it would have a breaking point where everything started to unravel. In a way, humans absorbing the spiritual energy from the environment was like fleas leaping on a cow. Even 1,000 fleas might not mean much to the cow, but what if there were millions or even billions of them? No matter how strong the cow was, it would eventually collapse under the burden and die. In the face of this practical problem, the 100 schools of philosophers had no choice but to limit the distribution of cultivation resources, granting only the most talented individuals the privilege to cultivate. Perhaps, the master-teacher continent might find itself forced to make the same decision as well in the distant future. Since we're on the topic, is that why the master-teacher continent lost its ability to support the birth of newer ancient sages? Zhong Xian asked. Be it the master-teacher continent or the Kungsu domain, not a single ancient sage had been born from 10,000 years back to before the recent emergence of the Temple of Confucius. Could this possibly be the reason? Well, overpopulation does play a part in that, but it isn't the primary reason, ancient sage Yang Qing replied. As you might know, the eon of ancient sage is the necessary catalyst for any cultivator to achieve a breakthrough to ancient sage. However, the eon of ancient sage is not something that naturally appears in the master-teacher continent nor the Kungsu domain, or to be more exact, this entire world doesn't have the ability to create the eon of ancient sage. It is an energy that is unique to the azure. The sealing of the heavy energy meant that the eon of ancient sage is unable to flow down to our world anymore. As such, with the birth of more and more ancient sages, it eventually came to a point where it dried out completely. You mean to say that the heavy spiritual energy contains the eon of ancient sage? Zhong Xian asked with raised eyebrows. He had absorbed a sliver of it back when he was at the mountain range, but as soon as it entered his body, its weight had nearly crushed all of his meridians. This had forced him to seal all of his acupoints. Yet, there was actually eon of ancient sage in it. Perplexed, Zhongxian quietly absorbed a small bit of it. The mercury-like energy felt as heavy as ever, but upon closer inspection, he did sense a hint of eon of ancient sage in it. It was just a small amount, but as one absorbed more and more of it, it was only a matter of time before one overcame the great sage bottleneck and rose to become one of the top experts of the master-teacher continent. But that was assuming one was able to assimilate this domineering energy. Given how even he himself was unable to absorb it, he was not too hopeful for the other cultivators. There was no other choice. If we didn't seal the energy from the azure, the otherworldly demons would only have grown stronger and stronger, eventually leading to the eradication of mankind. It was a decision our predecessors made after careful deliberation. It hasn't led to a good outcome, but it's the lesser of two evils, ancient sage Yang Qing explained bitterly. Zhongxian also fell into deep contemplation. There was no denying that the presence of more ancient sages was good news for mankind, but as long as they did not deal with the mercury-like energy, the greatest beneficiary would ultimately still be the otherworldly demonic tribe. As long as the mercury-like energy existed on the master-teacher continent, it was only a matter of time before the scales were tipped in the favor of the otherworldly demonic tribe. Not to mention, there were deities from the azure who could descend through the dimension barrier. The threat that they posed could not be underestimated either. Is it true that the otherworldly demonic tribe are the descendants of the gods, just like the legends depict them to be? Zhongxian asked out of curiosity. Was it really just a problem in the compatibility of their constitution that meant they were unable to absorb the mercury-like energy whereas the otherworldly demons were able to? I don't really know the exact answer, but there are written quotes from Kongshu that suggest that the otherworldly demonic tribe are the descendants of an exiled god tribe. He said that it's due to the scarce spiritual energy on the master-teacher continent that resulted in their severe weakening, and as long as they are supplied with pure spiritual energy, they will swiftly return to their former glory. Speaking up to this point, ancient sage Yang Qing suddenly turned to the two caged youths and sighed deeply. These two over there are perfect examples. They were ordinary otherworldly demons when they were first captured, but under the nourishment of the heavy spiritual energy from the azure, they grew so much stronger within less than 10 years. On top of that, their appearances have also become no different from those of ordinary humans. Even the most talented human would have to cultivate for hundreds of years before reaching sempiternal realm consummation. However, those otherworldly demons were actually able to reach such a height within a shorter period of time just by absorbing and assimilating the heavy spiritual energy. It sure was frustrating. But if deities are able to pass through the dimension barrier to descend upon our world, we should also be able to ascend to the azure through the same way, right? Zhongxian asked as his heart leaped in agitation. Chapter 1900 Sacrifice. The reason he had gone through so much effort to enter the Kungsu domain was to find the passageway leading to the azure in order to reach Luo Ruoxin. Since there was a passageway above the elevated platform and the deities were able to pass through, not to mention the fact that the mercury-like spiritual energy leaking out from the void came directly from the azure, could that actually be the way he had been seeking all along? To be honest, I don't really know. Ancient sage Yang Qing shook his head. I see. Then, do you know how Kongshu left the Kungsu domain to enter the azure? Regarding that, ancient sage Yang Qing's face reddened in embarrassment. In truth, most of Kongshu's direct disciples did not even know of his departure back then, let alone a junior who came many generations later like him. It's only recorded in the books that shortly after Kongshu achieved a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm, he left this world. As for where he went, I'm afraid that it isn't recorded anywhere. However, our historians who investigated the matter deduced that there's a good chance that his disappearance had something to do with this seal. This time, it was Kongshu Yarrow who answered Zhongxian's question. Hearing those words, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. From the looks of it, there was a good chance that the void above the elevated platform was the way into the azure. However, with his current strength, he would not last long surrounded by the mercury-like spiritual energy. Perhaps the minimum requirement to doing so was to first reach the Dimension Shatterer realm. Clearly, The current hymn still had much to work on. Zhongshe, pardon me, but I have a question for you. The seal on the Kungsu domain was created by Kongshe himself, making it impossible for anyone to enter or leave. The reason we were able to enter the master-teacher continent previously was because we were able to tap into the power of the Temple of Confucius to temporarily breach the seal. So, how did you manage to get in here? Ancient sage Yang Qing asked with a doubtful frown. This question made the others direct intrigued looks at Zhongshen. It was an established fact among them that it was impossible for them to enter or leave the Kungsu domain. The emergence of the Temple of Confucius had been the only exception to the rule in the past tens of thousands of years. However, it had been several months since the Temple of Confucius closed, so it should be impossible to exploit this loophole. Given so, how did Zhongshen manage to get in there? Feeling that there was no reason to hide this matter from them, Zhongshen replied honestly. While I was visiting the Tianxian kingdom, I found a seal that was centered around ancient sage Ran Qiu. Out of curiosity, I broke the seal, and before I knew it, I was already in the Kungsu domain. Wait a moment, did you say that you broke the seal? You broke that seal? Ancient sage Yang Qing and the others shook in agitation. What's wrong? Quick, let's head over to take a look. With no time to explain, ancient sage Yang Qing swiftly opened up a dimension rift and leaped in. The others quickly followed suit. In just a moment's time, they had already arrived at where Zhongshen had entered the Kungsu domain. The seal was still standing firm, but the hole that Zhongshen and the others had entered through was gradually expanding. They could just about see black flames pressing firmly against the exterior of the Kungsu domain, attempting to force its way in. Zhongshen was taken aback. What's going on here? He knew just how powerful the seal was, and he had needed to make use of the powerful ordeal of lightning armament in order to open up a small hole to open. Why would there suddenly be such powerful black flames pressing against the seal? Not to mention, they bore an uncanny resemblance to the Empyrean heavenly flames. This is the backlash from the heavens, ancient sage Yang Qing grimly explained. Backlash from the heavens? While we have isolated the Kungsu domain from the master-teacher continent, it still doesn't change the fact that they are actually one entity. What we are doing here, the cultivation of the green sprout wheat and the enhancement of the fundamental constitution of mankind, is going against the laws of nature, thus creating a distortion in this world. The reason ancient sage Ran Qiu's body was left outside is not just to sustain the seal, more than that, it's to prevent the heavens from peeking in. However, now that the heavens have learned of what we have done in the Kungsu domain, they've sent down divine retribution to punish us and undo what we have done. At this rate, it won't be long before the Kungsu domain is swallowed by the raging flames of the heaven's fury, ancient sage Yang Qing exclaimed worriedly. Zhongshen's body stiffened. Every world had its own rules, and these rules were enforced by the heavens. Anyone who tried to breach these rules would find themselves faced with the wrath of the heavens. In a sense, this was similar to how cultivators attempting to push for higher realms would have to face heavenly tribulations. Putting everything aside, in his previous world, Wang Mang, being a transmigrator, had attempted to change the world. But in the end, the heavens had sent down the son of the heavens, Liu Xiu, in retaliation, and the latter had easily destroyed everything that he had built. The rules of the world could not be disregarded, and even ancient sages were no exception to the rule. Zhongshen had thought that the reason no one was able to find the Kungsu domain was due to the lofty 100 schools of philosophers trying to steer clear from the rest of the world, but it turned out that their main goal was to conceal themselves from the detection of the heavens. If people frequently entered and left the Kungsu domain, it was only a matter of time before the heavens detected the existence of the Kungsu domain. Once that happened, everything would be utterly destroyed, be it the green sprout wheat, the 100 schools of philosophers, or even the domain itself. Knowing that this was a catastrophe that he had caused, Zhongshen turned to ancient sage Yang Qing and asked, "Do you have any blueprints of it for me to mend the formation? I'll seal off the Kungsu domain once to prevent the heavens from peeking in." "We do have the blueprint to the formation, but it's of no use." Ancient sage Yang Qing shook his head. What has been breached isn't just this seal but the illusory formation that was set up outside too. Previously, if the heavens attempted to peer into the coffin, Kongshe's body would appear, which would lead the heavens to think that Kongsha has passed away, thus halting their investigation right there. However, the fact that the black flames have reached this seal means that the illusory formation has been undone. The heavens are already aware of everything. Any reparation work done now will only delay the inevitable. Zhongxian fell silent. On his way to the Kungsu domain, there had been 2 stone coffins. One of them contained ancient sage Ran Qiu's body, and it was used to maintain the illusory formation. As for the second coffin, what Zheng Yang saw was Kongsha's corpse, whereas what they saw was Zheng Yang himself. It was the breaking of the illusory formation that had brought the seal isolating the Kungsu domain from the master-teacher continent to his attention. With these 2 preventive measures breached, the eyes of the heavens were already fixated on the Kungsu domain. Even if they mended everything right now, it would make no difference at all. Is there nothing that can be done? There's only one way out of this. We have to deceive the heavens once more, like Kongsha did. Deceive the heavens? UN. Back then, when Kongsha first developed the Kungsu domain, a hint of the energy contained within leaked out, and it swiftly caught the heavens' attention. It was due to ancient sage Ran Qiu's willing sacrifice to sustain an illusory formation that they eventually managed to deceive and placate the heavens, ancient sage Yang Qing said grimly. There's only one way for us to resolve the problem. We have to find a Dimension Shatterer realm cultivator who is willing to sacrifice himself to die under the hands of the heavens. Using his death as a catalyst, we'll create an illusion of the entire Kungsu domain falling into ruins. While the heavens punish those who have failed to abide by the laws of the world, it would be inaccurate to say that they are a sentient force. As long as our means are sufficiently convincing, there's a chance that we'll succeed. Those words made Zhongxian's eyebrows shoot up. Be it in the entire master-teacher continent or the Kungsu domain, there was not a single Dimension Shatterer realm expert still alive. While his strength paired with the Dragonbone Divine Spear was very close to that of a Dimension Shatterer realm cultivator, his core was simply too much different from that of a real Dimension Shatterer realm cultivator. The heavens would see through his disguise easily. I'll do it. I don't have long to live anyway. Even if I'm unable to fully deceive the heavens, I should at least be able to buy some time. Ancient sage Yang Qing sighed as he looked at the seal with determination. UN. While my cultivation hasn't reached the Dimension Shatterer realm, it's very close to it. Through igniting my soul and my physical body, I should be able to temporarily draw forth a might comparable to Dimension Shatterer realm cultivators, and perhaps, I might be able to deceive the heavens temporarily through that. Ancient sage Yang Qing replied. Ignite your soul and physical body? Kongsha Yarrow was startled. But once your soul and physical body are destroyed, it will really be the end of you. There would be no way you will be able to come back to life. Upon reaching the blood reincarnation realm, even if one's physical body was torn apart, there was still a chance for one to revive. However, if he ignited his soul and body, he would really die through and through. There was nothing in this world that could bring back a dissipated soul, not even the eon of ancient sage. I know that, but as long as I can protect the Kungsu domain, my death will not be in vain. Ancient sage Yang Qing replied. As a human ancient sage, he had already resolved himself to sacrifice everything he had for the preservation of mankind. If his death could save many more people, his sacrifice would be worth it. Hold that thought for a moment. Let me take a look and see if there is any other way to resolve this situation. Seeing that ancient sage Yang Qing was going to rush over at any moment to give up his life for the greater good, Zhongxian walked up to the black flames with a frown and tapped his finger lightly on it. Chapter 1901 Become my student, be careful, those are the Empyrean flames. Kongsha Yarrow shouted in horror. The Empyrean heavenly flame was known to be able to burn down everything in the world. Given how it was able to burn down even the seal created by Kongsha, the young man was courting death by attempting to touch it directly with his fingers. But before Kongsha Yarrow could finish her piece, Zhongxian's fingers had already fallen on the flames. The black flames twisted under the touch of his fingers, reminiscent of an embarrassed bride. It was almost as if the flames were meeting an old flame and trying to flirt with him. Kongsha Yao's cheeks twitched in incredulity at what she was seeing. Why did it feel like anything that Zhongxian touched would somehow become warped and tainted? Despite being a celestial master teacher, a person of equal standing to her great ancestor, he had a brick that relentlessly struck one's face and a spear that seemed to fancy tying everything in its path up. Furthermore, while he was fighting with the deity, he had no qualms striking the sensitive regions, be it the eyeballs, the neck, or even the crotch. Anywhere an attack could slip through, one could expect no mercy from him. It was as if he knew nothing of common courtesy, and the current situation only further confirmed her thoughts. Even the heavenly flames that everyone feared behaved in such a lewd manner under his touch. What a frightening man this Zhongxian was. Ignoring the shocked crowd, Zhongxian looked at the flames burning at his fingertips and asked, "Little Huahua, did Dao Dao send you here?" Seemingly comprehending Zhongxian's words, the black flames shook a little. This etched a frown onto Zhongxian's forehead. Based on the response from the Empyrean heavenly flames, it was clear that they had been dispatched by the heavens to destroy the Kungsu domain. If one viewed the master-teacher continent as a human's body, the heavens would be its immune system. Its role was to destroy all foreign objects and anomalies in order to ensure that everything followed its intended course. The presence of humans with exceptionally powerful constitutions in the Kungsu domain could be viewed as a cancerous tumor, and to the heavens, it was something that had to be destroyed at all costs. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before slipping out of the hole to return to the master-teacher continent. Up in the sky, ominous clouds were gathering a devastating combo of lightning and flames at a terrifying rate, as if swearing to never rest until the Kungsu domain was utterly destroyed. Under Zhongxian's protection, ancient sage Yang Qing also managed to pass through the hole as well to come to the master-teacher continent. Zhongxian turned to the old man behind him and asked, "You mentioned earlier that the death of a dimension-shatterer realm cultivator can possibly deceive the heavens, right?" UN. That was the concept used for the formation that our predecessors set up back then, ancient sage Yang Qing replied as he passed a jade token over. Zhongxian took the jade token and swiftly browsed through its contents. Following which, with a flick of his wrist, a human silhouette materialized right in front of him. A deity? No, that's not right. You forged a deity into a soulless metal humanoid? Ancient sage Yang Qing was nearly scared out of his wits. The being that had just appeared in front of him was emanating an aura of ancient history. With just a glance, it was apparent that it had reached the dimension-shatterer realm, boasting a strength that was on par with the deity whom they had fought with earlier. To slay a deity from the azure and forge him into a soulless metal humanoid. This was almost blasphemy. UN. Zhongxian nodded. Since things had progressed to this point, there was nothing for him to hide anymore. He drew his soul out from his body and slipped it into the soulless metal humanoid. With his means, he was still unable to enchant the soulless metal humanoid. Thus, he could only drive it while his soul was within the soulless metal humanoid. This was a good opportunity for him to try his hand and see if it was really possible to imitate what Kongshe and his direct disciples had done back then to deceive the heavens. Under Zhongxian's refinement, he had already shaped the soulless metal humanoid to have an extremely high compatibility with his soul. As such, the prerequisites to conduct the process should have already been met. Hong Long. As soon as Zhongxian's soul slipped into the soulless metal humanoid, the ominous clouds immediately gathered around his body. Everyone's eyes lit up in agitation as they clenched their fists tightly in excitement. It seemed like things were going to work out after all. But a moment later, the ominous clouds abruptly dispersed from Zhongxian, as if having lost interest in him. What's going on here? Zhongxian was surprised to see that things were not proceeding in the direction that he had expected. Based on what was stated on the jade token, the appearance of a dimension-shatterer realm cultivators should have drawn the wrath of the heavens upon him. Then, through a carefully designed ploy, he would put on a facade and substitute himself as the Kungsu domain, and eventually, he would die in place of it. But contrary to his expectations, the heavenly retribution was shunning him. This put him at a loss as to what to do. I think I get it. After recovering from a momentary daze, ancient sage Yang Qing's eyes widened in realization. With a dismayed shake of his head, he explained, "The soulless metal humanoid you have possessed is a deity from the azure. It isn't an indigenous being of this world, and the heavens are able to sense the difference. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before nodding in response. Based on what he had seen so far, it seemed like the heavens had double standards. They did not hesitate to punish the indigenous population under their rule, but against foreign beings who exceeded their knowledge, it would hesitate to make a move. The deity that he had forged into a soulless metal humanoid originated from the azure, making him an existence that was anomalous to the world. As such, the heavens of the master-teacher continent were hesitant to make a move on him. It was also for this reason that the two deities did not come under the attack of the heavens despite having slipped through the dimension barrier. If it had been one of the indigenous cultivators of the master-teacher continent, there was no doubt that the heavens would have struck that person with everything they had to reduce them to ashes. Is there anything else we can do? Zhongxian was rendered speechless. In the end, even though the heavens were said to be impartial and unfeeling to all, the truth was that they were just a bully who feared the strong. For example, even though Luo Ruoxin's very presence posed a huge threat to the world, the heavens chose to only drive her away forcefully, not daring to provoke her through heavenly flames or lightning bolts. That question obviously stumped ancient sage Yang Qing. He was silent for a moment before he proposed, "Zhongshe, try leaving the soulless metal humanoid for a moment." He had no idea what they could do either, so they could only give everything a try in hopes that something would work out. Hearing the suggestion, Zhongxian quickly extracted his soul from the soulless metal humanoid and began to return to his main body. Perhaps due to the heavens sensing that the consciousness within the soulless metal humanoid earlier had departed from it, the heavens began gathering around it once more. But this won't work either. Zhongxian scratched his hair in distress. He had to be within the soulless metal humanoid to drive it in order to facilitate the entire process of deceiving the heavens. Given that he was unable to control the soulless metal humanoid remotely, this plan was a flop as well. If this doesn't work, I could try to refine the other corpse of the deity that I have in my storage ring right now. But as Zhongxian spoke, his voice gradually faded into silence. He did have another deity corpse in his storage ring that he had not refined yet. However, the corpse had to be first refined into a soulless metal humanoid in order to catch the attention of the heavens, but the refinement process was not something that could be accomplished within a short period of time. We can't refine the other soulless metal humanoids in time, and there are no indigenous dimension Shatterer realm experts. What else can we do? Watching the black flames assault the seal to the Kungsu domain relentlessly, Zhongxian racked his brain at such a ferocious speed that it seemed as if sparks were going to fly from his head. A thought flashed across Zhongxian's mind. Right, the Library of Heaven's Path. The Library of Heaven's Path represents the will of the heavens. Given so, is it possible for me to use the golden page to bend the will of the heavens? However, there was an issue with this course of action as well. He had used his only golden page to smash the deity summoned by Sovereign Chen Ling back then. Furthermore, the requirements to produce a golden page were uncertain. So far, he only knew that he needed someone to acknowledge him as his teacher and be earnestly grateful to him for his impartation. Nevertheless, he had to give it a try. Thus, he turned to Kong Shiyaro and earnestly asked, Are you willing to acknowledge me as your teacher?" "What? No way." Kong Shiyaro replied without any hesitation. "Little flames, little heavens." Chapter 1902 Prof. Awkward. Zhongxian scratched his head. The others who were present there, such as ancient sage Yang Qing, were beings who had lived for more than 10,000 years. It would be difficult to win them over in a moment's time, especially given the fact that they had once had a conflict with one another. The same went for Yang Shui. Thus, he deemed Kong Shiyaro to be the one that he could most likely win over. Of course, he did not expect that he would be rejected in an instant. In truth, it was understandable why Kong Shiyaro was reluctant to take Zhongxian as her teacher. The fact that she possessed Kong Shi's bloodline and had inherited Kong Shi's lineage meant that she was already standing on the shoulders of a giant. Not even ancient sage Yang Qing was qualified to be her teacher, let alone others. It did not make a difference even if the person asking was a celestial master teacher. She admitted that her talent might be beneath that of Zhongxian, but she had at least this much of pride in herself. This matter concerns whether or not we will be able to resolve the crisis concerning the Kungsu domain, Zhongxian insisted. Furthermore, I have no plans of accepting you as my direct disciple. You just have to acknowledge me as your teacher. Based on his previous encounters, as long as the other party sincerely acknowledged him as his teacher and was grateful for his teachings, there was a chance that the golden page would form. It did not matter whether the other party was his direct disciple or not. How can me acknowledging you as my teacher resolve the current problem we are facing? Kong Shiyaro frowned. If not for the fact that the young man had just slain a deity and saved the 100 schools of philosophers from a huge crisis, she would have thought that he was a scammer. Why don't we do this for now? I'll give you some pointers on your cultivation, and as for whether you are willing to acknowledge me as your teacher or not, I'll leave it up to you. Looking at the swiftly gathering ominous clouds above him, Zhongxian knew that the heavenly retribution was just moments away from descending. It was clear that time was not on his side, so he had no time to waste convincing Kong Xiao. Besides, putting aside the fact that he was not willing to reveal the existence of the Library of Heaven's Path, if he had to make Kong Xiao acknowledge him as her teacher using such a method, it was unlikely for her feelings to be truly sincere. If so, that could affect the chances of the formation of the golden page. Thus, without waiting for Kong Xiao's response, he began speaking. Flowing in your body is the purest bloodline of Kongsha in the past 1,000 years. You are able to master any battle technique and cultivation technique in the blink of an eye, and the rate of your cultivation far exceeds that of ordinary people as well. Furthermore, if I'm not mistaken, even though it has only been 3 years since your cultivation has reached sempiternal realm consummation, you have already faced 3 ancient sage ordeals thus far, but you chose to suppress your cultivation instead of pushing straight for a breakthrough. Kong Shiyaro nodded as she waited patiently for Zhongxian to continue on with whatever he was going to say. Nothing that Zhongxian had mentioned thus far could be considered a secret. Most of those who were close to her knew all of that. Considering Zhongxian's means as a celestial master teacher, it should not have been too difficult for him to uncover such information. With each ancient sage ordeal you faced, your cultivation did grow stronger, and it will play a vital role in determining whether you are able to struggle free from the restraints of the heavens and achieve a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm in the future. However, you probably noticed that a problem has arisen as a result of your multiple attempted breakthroughs, Zhongxian said. The power of the ancient sage ordeal has already melded into your core. Your body still contains traces of the energies from the multiple ancient sage ordeals that you have been through, and this buildup of unassimilable energies eventually became a bottleneck to your cultivation. You challenged the ancient sage ordeal 3 times within the short span of a year 2 years ago, but ever since then, you haven't attempted anything at all. I think it's worth questioning why you chose to delay the 4th ancient sage ordeal for 2 whole years. Based on what I'm seeing, I would say that it's not because you don't want to do it but because you dare not to. As if Zhongxian had struck dead on, Kong Xiao's face turned frighteningly pale. She subconsciously took a step back as she stared at Zhongxian with eyes enlarged wide. This matter had been the deepest secret in her heart, and she had not dared speak of it. She did not think that a young man whom she had just met would actually expose it in a few moments. When she first reached the sempiternal realm 3 years ago, she had dreamt of emulating her predecessor's greatness and attempted 3 ancient sage ordeals. Her first 3 ancient sage ordeals had been fraught with danger, but she had eventually managed to overcome them with her tenacity. But after the 3rd ancient sage ordeal, to her horror, she found that the energies from the ancient sage ordeals had already seeped into her bones. No matter how she tried to cleanse her body, she was unable to get rid of them. Her gut feeling told her that if she attempted another ancient sage ordeal and allowed the energies scourging her body to continue building up, there was a good chance that her consciousness would be corroded by the energies, causing her to lose herself. In the worst-case scenario, she might even be assimilated to become a part of the heavenly tribulation itself. It was this deep fear that had led to her to stop her breakthrough despite having overcome 3 ancient sage ordeals within the short span of a year. 2 years had passed since then, and she had not managed to find a suitable solution. However, her physical condition had been deteriorating as she began to lose control over the energies scourging her body. She had browsed through countless books, hoping to find a solution to purge her of this trouble, but her efforts were to no avail. However, to hear Zhongxian pointing everything out spot on at this moment, could it be possible that he had a solution to her woes? As if he was able to read her mind, Zhongxian chuckled softly. Since I can see through your problem, it goes without saying that I have a solution for it. You should be able to tell that I, like you, have overcome multiple ancient sage ordeals, but I am not plagued by the issue that afflicts you. Kong Shiyaro nodded vigorously as the same realization dawned upon her, and hope rekindled in the depths of her eyes. Just like her, the young man standing before her was at the sempiternal realm, but he was actually able to fight on equal footing with Dimension Shatterer realm cultivators. Other than the fact that he was a celestial master teacher, it was likely that he had faced multiple ancient sage ordeals while suppressing his cultivation, or else there was no way he could have become so powerful. If I may, how can my affliction be resolved? If you are really able to solve my problem, I am more than willing to acknowledge you as my teacher, Kong Shiyaro exclaimed in agitation. As long as her affliction was resolved, with her foundation of having overcome 4 ancient sage ordeals, she was confident that she would be able to catch up with her ancestor and eventually reach the Dimension Shatterer realm. With such strength, even if problems cropped up with the seal once more, she would have the strength to resolve them by herself. Perhaps, she might even follow her predecessor's footsteps and enter a higher dimension, rising through the ranks. The problem is actually very simple. Unlike the cultivators on the master-teacher continent, the energy required to form the cultivation ordeals within the Kungsu domain comes not from the heavens but the energy existent in the Kungsu domain. As the Kungsu domain was constructed by Kongsha, this world harnesses his energy within it. To any other cultivator, this fact wouldn't make a difference at all, but unfortunately, you share the same power origin as Kongsha, which resulted in your inability to expel the energies from the ancient sage ordeal, as well as your gradual assimilation with it. Zhongxian explained. The Kungsu domain had 2 major seals to prevent the heavens from peeking in, so it went without saying that the ancient sage ordeals that Kong Shiyaro had undergone did not come from the heavens. From the looks of it, it was likely that Kongsha had implemented the system of cultivation ordeals within the Kungsu domain as well. It should have worked out fine for any other cultivator, but that was not the case for Kong Shiyao. While the energies of the ancient sage ordeal came from the same origin, their violent nature rendered her unable to fully control them. At the same time, she was unable to fully remove them as they fused perfectly with her body, thus leading to their gradual build-up with every ancient sage ordeal that she went through. Over time, they formed a threat that she simply could not ignore anymore. What should I do? Kong Shiyao asked worriedly. The realization of the root of the problem made her realize how difficult it would be to cure her of her affliction, and she began to worry if she would be unable to resolve it for life. Well, the solution is rather simple and straightforward as well. All you have to do is challenge the ancient sage ordeal on the master-teacher continent. Of course, given your current accumulation, I don't deny that you face a huge danger in doing so. At this current juncture, you have 2 options ahead of you. If you choose not to push for a breakthrough, as your zhenqi further builds up, you will eventually lose your opportunity to make a breakthrough. On the other hand, if you do push for a breakthrough, considering that you have never come into contact with the lightning tribulation of the master-teacher continent before, even I am unable to fully predict what will happen as a result of that, Zhongxian explained with a knowing smile. However, if you acknowledge me as your teacher, I'll teach you a method that will allow you to overcome your ancient sage ordeal with certainty. Seeing that there was no other way out of this, Kong Shiyaro decisively kneeled down and kowtowed several times. All right, I'll acknowledge you as my teacher. I hope that you will save me from my plight. Zhongxian took a look at the Library of Heaven's Path and saw that no golden page had been produced yet. Knowing that Kong Xiao's feelings were not yet earnest, he sighed deeply and said, overcoming the ancient sage ordeal on the master-teacher continent isn't tough at all. The key lies in that you mustn't think of it as a burden but a family member. You need to love it, care for it, consider its needs, feel its presence, give it your warmth and concern. Kong Xiao's face twisted in incredulity, and at that very moment, she really wanted to bust the head of the fellow standing before her. Somehow, she felt as if she had just been scammed. Chapter 1903 Kong Xiao's Breakthrough 1 Cough Cough. Zhongshe, the main point. Even ancient sage Yang Qing could not bear looking on. The ancient sage ordeal was one of the greatest crises a cultivator would face. Even with ample eon of ancient sage, if one did not possess top-notch talent, it would be impossible to achieve a breakthrough. The reason that Kong Xiao was able to make a breakthrough was partly because she was allocated with a more generous portion of the resources in the Kungsu domain due to her standing as a descendant of Kongshe. Even though the eon of ancient sage had already run out in the other clans, they were still able to preserve a hint of it for her. Even so, every breakthrough that she had gone through was no different from walking on thin ice. One wrong step, and she would have plunged into the abyss of despair. Yet, that fellow was telling her to treat the cultivation ordeal like a family member and show care and concern for it. Do you take me for a fool? Do you really expect me to accept the nonsense you are spouting over here? It seems like you doubt my words. Zhongshe shook his head. He turned to the ominous clouds in the sky and grabbed. A lightning bolt was immediately torn away from the heavenly retribution. Catcher! Catcher! The lightning bolt struggled, wanting to escape from Zhongshe's grasp, but to no avail. Zhongshe stroked the lightning bolt gently and said, "Good boy, good boy." His voice was tender, as if he was calming down an angry pet. In the face of Zhongshe's soothing strokes, the struggling lightning bolt hesitated for a moment before the tension gradually left its body. Slowly, it seeped through Zhongshe's skin and entered his body. Kong Xiao and the others were stupefied by what they had just witnessed. Was this really possible? It had to be a joke, right? See, that's how you do it. Love is the key to everything. Instead of resisting it, you have to embrace and allow it into you. That's how you can win its trust and make it listen to you, Zhongshe explained as he flicked his wrist, and the bolt of lightning appeared once more. He stroked the lightning bolt lightly, as if coaxing a purring cat lying on his arms. As unbelievable the sight before their eyes was, it raised a doubt in their minds. Was it really possible to overcome the ancient sage ordeal in such a manner? If so, why had no one done so in the past tens of thousands of years? Considering how powerful the cultivation ordeal is, who would dare treat it as a pet? Trust me, nothing will go wrong. Later on, after you summon the ancient sage ordeal, open up all of the acupoints in your body and absorb it fearlessly. You mustn't show the slightest hint of rejection. Remember, you must use your heart to feel the other party, Zhongshe explained. As long as you are able to do all of this, I guarantee you that you won't face any problem clearing your ancient sage ordeal. Kong Xiao was still a little worried. No matter how she looked at it, the other party's words simply sounded like pure cow manure to her. Do you not trust me, or do you not have faith in yourself? If you don't believe that you are able to clear your fourth ancient sage ordeal, you should just drop the idea right now and remain a sempiternal realm cultivator for the rest of your life. Zhongshe waved his hand in disappointment. I have always respected Kongshe for the great man he was, and I thought that his descendant would be as valiant and fearless as him. I guess it was wrong of me to assume that his descendant would have inherited his courage. Don't bother taunting me. Kong Xiao harumphed. Humph, the worst that can happen is death anyway. Let me tell you this, we of the Kong clan have never feared anything before. Fine, tell me what I should do. Seeing that he had managed to goad Kong Xiao into it, Zhongshe nodded in satisfaction. He swiftly provided Kong Xiao with the exact instructions of what she should do after summoning the ancient sage ordeal, though the crux of it was pretty similar to what he had said earlier. After summoning the ancient sage ordeal, she should not resist it. She needed to draw it into her acupoints and meridians and use her heart to feel it. Hearing those words once more, Kong Xiao cringed as her goosebumps rose up. Even though it sounded like utter nonsense, she eventually decided to take a leap of faith and go along with. Gritting her teeth, she said, "I'll give it a try." Ignoring ancient sage Yang Qing's objection, she flew into the air in preparation for summoning the ancient sage ordeal. Don't do it here. Let's find a remote location. Currently, they were right in the midst of the Tianxian kingdom, and if Kong Xiao summoned the ancient sage ordeal there, everything in the area could very well be annihilated. Thus, Zhongshe quickly stopped her and urged her elsewhere. They quickly left the area, and a few breaths later, they were standing in the middle of an empty mountain range some distance away from the Qianxian kingdom. Zhongxian and the others chose to stand at a distance of 20 li away to spectate the process. Without any hesitation, Kong Xiao drove the energy in her body to her limits and released the entirety of her aura at once, inducing the surroundings to rumble as if an earthquake was happening. It took a mere instant for her to catch the attention of the heavens. Ominous clouds billowed as the lightning bolts and heavenly flames that had gathered around the entrance of the Kungsu domain surrounded her, ready to tear her into shreds at any moment. What the? It was almost as if she was watching a bean sprout growing insanely huge right before her eyes. Things were definitely not going the way she had expected. Ancient sage Yang Qing turned to Zhongxian and nervously asked, "Zhongshe, can she really tame and love such a powerful cultivation ordeal? What nonsense are you spouting?" "Of course not." Zhongxian turned to ancient sage Yang Qing and looked at him as if he was a fool. "Of course not." Hearing such a response, the crowd nearly collapsed on the spot. "Weren't you the one who was trying to convince us just a moment ago that the power of love is omnipotent? How can you be so fickle as to change your mind the very next instant?" "The ancient sage ordeal is the heaven's punishment toward the cultivators," Zhongxian replied. "A sinner trying to tame an enforcer, how could that be possible? What using one's heart to feel the cultivation ordeal and shower it with love and concern? All of that was just something I spouted on a whim." "Words you spouted on a whim. But Xiao is facing the ancient sage ordeal. She'll die like this." Ancient sage Yang Qing nearly exploded on the spot. Even jokes should have a limit. Kong Xiao was the only one among Kongsha's descendants who had a bloodline purity of 8. If he allowed her to die just like that, he would never be able to face his predecessors. "Calm down, I have no intention of leaving Kong Xiao to die. Just wait and see," Zhongxian assured the nervous crowd with a confident smile. At that moment, the power building up amid the dark clouds finally reached its tipping point, and ferocious lightning bolts and blazing heavenly flames rained down upon her. "Catcher!" The sheer amount of energy formed a devastating tower of flames and lightning that shrouded everything within a diameter of several hundred meters. "Damn it! If that fellow is able to do it, why can't I do it too?" Kong Xiao cursed under her breath as she felt her muscles tensing under the pressurizing might above her. Her zhenqi instinctively bubbled within her body, ready to burst forth to fend off the devastating energy. However, at the very last moment, she forcefully suppressed every last bit of her strength. Screw it all. Just thinking about the smug knowing smile on his face made her boil with rage. If she really died, she will never let that be *starred off even as a ghost. Boom boom boom. As the pillar of terrifying energy engulfed Kong Xiao, everyone in the area closed their eyes in trepidation, not daring to see what was about to happen. They did not think that their hearts would be able to take it if they saw the young lady being torn to shreds under the cultivation ordeal. However, as they waited and waited, there was no desperate cry of agony or anything of the sort. Perplexed, they looked over, and what they saw left them stunned. At that very moment, the young lady was indeed engulfed by heavenly flames and lightning bolts. But instead of desperately trying to resist this destructive energy, her acupoints were wide open as she accepted the energy into her body without any hesitation. Unlike what most had expected, the destructive energy did not cause any damage or explode within her body. It simply sat quietly in her meridians, almost as if it had been domesticated. What in the world had happened? Everyone looked at the young man before them with indescribable looks on their faces. Did he not just say that it was all lies? If so, what was happening? If Kong Xiao was able to do it, should they give it a try as well? At that moment, the sempiternal realm consummation Shui Yang felt deeply tempted. "Zhongshe." With his curiosity getting the better of him, ancient sage Yang Qing asked, "Just what is going on here?" Chapter 1904 Kong Xiao's Breakthrough 2. Instead of answering ancient sage Yang Qing's question, Zhongxian turned to Shui Yang and shattered his hopes. "You won't be able to do it. If you try to do the same, you'll be struck to death on the spot." "Why can't I do it?" Shui Yang frowned in indignance. "It's not just you. Even I would be unable to emulate what Kong Shiyaro has just done, Zhong Xian replied. Kong Shiyaro possesses Kong Shi's bloodline, and she grew up in the Kungsu domain. After the cultivation ordeals she has been through, it's no exaggeration to say that a part of the Kungsu domain exists within her. The crowd pondered for a moment before nodding. It was mentioned earlier that after Kong Xiao's 3 ancient sage ordeals, her body was already suffused with the energies from the cultivation ordeals. If she attempted a 4th breakthrough in the Kungsu domain, it was likely that she would have been assimilated by the energies building up within her. And the very existence of the Kungsu domain is something that is not permissible by the heavens of the master-teacher continent. Zhong Xian continued. If she had attempted to resist the cultivation ordeal, she would have incurred the wrath of the heavens, and that would have only placed her in a worse position. The more she struggled, the worse the position she would have found herself in. There's no denying that the heavens wanted to punish Kong Shiyaro for attempting a breakthrough, but more than that, they were more desperate to destroy the trace of the Kungsu domain that exists within her. Trying to push off the cultivation ordeal would be equivalent to hindering the heavens' enforcement of the natural laws, and that would have placed her in a worse position. The heavens would surely have struck her again and again until she was finally destroyed. However, by opening her acupoints and allowing the lightning bolts and heavenly flames in instead, it's equivalent to allowing the enforcers in to do what they needed to do. This has reduced her sins significantly, thus reducing the heavenly retribution falling on her. On top of that, she can make use of this opportunity to clear away the energies accumulated within her body, thus killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Everyone's teeth clattered in shock. From how the heavens of the master-teacher continent were so determined to destroy the Kungsu domain, it was apparent that the 2 of them were at odds with one another. Yet, Zhong Xian was able to sharply discern this and use it to his advantage, thus wearing the heavenly retribution down through such a method. This was an extremely risky gamble. If anything had gone wrong, everything would have swiftly descended into a tragedy. While ancient sage Yang Qing was amazed by the feat, he could not help but harbor some reservations toward this risky plan. In a sense, this is similar to countering poison with poison. But if the 2 energies weren't enough to nullify one another, wouldn't Shiyaro be placed in a terrible position? It was one of those things that were simple in theory but hard to execute. There was a fixed amount of accumulated energies within Kong Xiao's body. If she had absorbed too little of the heavenly retribution, she would not be able to clear the energies away entirely. But if she absorbed too much, it could lead to her death. That's why I told her to feel with her heart, didn't I? Zhong Xian said. As Kong Shi's descendant, the number 1 genius of the Kungsu domain, if she isn't even capable of carrying out such basic estimations and controlling how much of the heavenly retribution she has taken in, I will really have nothing to say. If that's all she has, even if she survives this ordeal, I must say that she won't be able to go too far in the future. It was not out of boredom that Zhong Xian had spun up an old wives' tale to deceive Kong Xiao. If he had revealed the truth to her at the start, her mind would have been preoccupied with other things, and that might have caused her to lose focus on her own body. That would have led to an adverse effect instead. Coming to understand the entire situation, the crowd could not help but direct impressed looks at the young man. His grasp over states of mind, the nature of the heavenly tribulation, and the capabilities of those involved. Everything was in his field of calculation, and he had managed to pull it off impeccably. As expected of a celestial master-teacher, his abilities far surpassed even those of the ancient sages. While everyone else was awestruck after hearing the young man's explanation, up in the sky, Kong Shiyaro, who had experienced everything firsthand, was fully convinced of the young man's capabilities. Even though this celestial master-teacher seemed to be even younger than her, there was no doubt that he was the real deal. Even though she had not heard the explanation, she already vaguely understood the intentions behind the young man's actions. As the lightning bolts and heavenly flames from the ancient sage ordeal washed through her body, all of the energies that she had built up back in the Kungsu domain were slowly being neutralized and destroyed. Even though 2 forces were colliding with one another within her body remained perfectly fine. Not only so, through examining the powers within her body, she was able to further deepen her understanding of the world. Time slowly ticked by, and soon enough, The energies from the past ancient sage ordeals accumulated within her body had finally been eradicated. Kong Shiyaro knew that this was the moment for her to stop, so she decisively sealed all of her acupoints and ignited her bloodline. "Dissipate," she commanded. Word of law. At that moment, the ancient sage ordeal that she had summoned weakened significantly, such that it was no longer a match for her. At her command, an entire half of the ominous clouds in the sky dissipated, and the rest were gradually following suit. Hong long long. With the departure of the ominous clouds, the young lady released all of her suppressed powers. She crushed all of the bottlenecks in her cultivation and reached ancient sage in a breath. Furthermore, due to the deep accumulation of her cultivation, she did not stop right after her breakthrough. Instead, her cultivation continued charging forth. Bloodline Continuance Realm Primary Stage. Bloodline Continuance Realm Intermediate Stage. In a few moments, she had already reached Ancient Sage 1 and Bloodline Continuance Realm Consummation, and after which, Great Philosopher Realm Primary Stage, Great Philosopher Realm Intermediate Stage, Great Philosopher Realm Consummation. In less than a minute, her cultivation soared to Great Philosopher Realm Consummation Stage before gradually receding. "Incredible," Ancient Sage Yang Qing muttered in admiration. For most of their breakthroughs to Ancient Sage, they would usually stop right at Bloodline Continuance Primary Stage. Even the most talented of them all only managed to push up to Intermediate Stage before losing the drive. However, Kong Shiyaro had actually leaped 2 realms up in a single breath, reaching Great Philosopher Realm Consummation. Such a feat had never been achieved in the past tens of thousands of years in the Kungsu domain. It's all due to this young man that Shiyaro was able to make such a huge leap in her cultivation, Ancient Sage Yang Qing thought in wonderment as he turned to look at Zhongxian. But at that moment, Zhongxian was looking at the young lady in the sky with a dissatisfied look on his face. "Continue to push on. With your accumulation, you should be able to push for a breakthrough to the Blood Reincarnation Realm." Blood Reincarnation Realm? Kong Shiyaro was stunned. She quickly shook her head and replied, "I have already reached my limits. I don't have enough energy in me to push for another breakthrough anymore." Even though she had made great accumulation by suppressing her cultivation through 4 ancient sage ordeals, she knew that she had already struck her limit by pushing to Ancient Sage 2 Dan consummation in a single sitting. She did not think that she would be able to push any further than that. Limits? Those are mental constructs that you impose on yourself, Zhongxian remarked as he flicked a droplet of blood toward Kong Shiyaro. "Swallow it." Yes. By that point, Kong Shiyaro was completely trusting of Zhongxian. Without any hesitation, she swallowed the droplet of blood. As soon as the droplet of blood slid down her throat, she immediately felt a burning heat inside of her threatening to combust her from the inside. "Is this the blood of the deity?" Kong Shiyaro widened her eyes. She had absorbed quite a few blood essences of Blood Reincarnation Realm cultivators over the years, and it was for that reason that she was able to make such incredible accomplishments despite your young age. However, the blood essence that the young man had just given her was much more potent than anything she had swallowed before. In terms of power, it was at least 10 times greater than the Blood Reincarnation Realm blood essences that she had swallowed. There was only one possibility for this. It was the blood of a Dimension Shatterer Realm cultivator. To think that the young man would willingly give something so invaluable to her. Kong Xiao's face reddened in a mixture of agitation and gratitude, but she knew that this was not the time for her thoughts to be wandering. She quickly drove her zhenqi to assimilate the energy from the blood essence. An hour later, she shattered her bottleneck once more and successfully advanced to the Blood Reincarnation Realm. Her cultivation eventually came to a halt at the intermediate stage. Feeling the energy pulsating through her body, Kong Shiyaro swiftly flew over to Zhongxian and kneeled down before him. "Teacher." This time, her feelings of gratitude and respect were truly earnest. "Wang." Zhongxian's head jolted as a golden page appeared in the Library of Heaven's Path. Chapter 1905 Little Junior. The main reason Zhongxian wanted to accept Kong Shiyaro as his direct disciple was to form the Golden Page, and his goal had finally been achieved. "Get up." Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief as he helped the young lady up. With this, he should be able to resolve the crisis surrounding the Kungsu domain. Teacher, is that our little junior? Zhongxian turned his head around and saw Zhao Yue and his other direct disciples looking at him in agitation. Kong Xiao's ancient sage ordeal had caused such a massive phenomenon to occur, shaking the entire Tianxian kingdom. As ancient sage cultivators, there was no way Zhao Yue and the others would not be alarmed by the happenings. Little junior. Kong Xiao was a little conflicted to hear that term. She was the #1 genius of the Kungsu domain, a descendant of Kong Shi. To call a bunch of youths younger than her senior, she really could not bring herself to do it. Just as Kong Xiao was at a loss as to what to do, Zhongshe suddenly spoke up. She can't be considered your junior yet. She isn't my direct disciple but a normal student that I have accepted. A normal student that you have accepted. Kong Xiao's body trembled at those words. It was just a moment ago that she had thought that it would be incredibly awkward being their little junior, but Zhongxian spoke as if she did not even have the rights to be their little junior. She turned to glare at Zhongxian with gritted teeth, wanting to protest against that clear insult, only to have Zhongshe turn to her and ask, "Do you think that I am humiliating you?" Knowing that it would be improper for her to challenge her teacher publicly, she swallowed her indignation and lowered her head. "I wouldn't dare." Nevertheless, the clenched fists by her side fully expressed her true feelings. As the phoenix of the Kungsu domain, she felt that it was ridiculous that she did not even have the right to become the little junior of a bunch of youths. "It's fine, there's no need to hold back before me. I know your thoughts. Why don't we do this then? Zhao Yue is my direct disciple, and in terms of age, she's much younger than you," Zhongxian said as he gestured toward Zhao Yue. "Without any weapons in hand, the two of you will just fight with your raw strength. If you are able to win against her, I'll accept you as my direct disciple and allow you to become their senior." "Very well." Caught up in the moment, Kong Xiao looked at Zhao Yue with fighting will burning in her eyes. The other party appeared to be 18 or so, which made the other party much younger than her. If she could not even defeat such an opponent, what right did she have to be Kong Shi's descendant? After receiving Kong Xiao's approval, Zhongxian turned to look at Zhao Yue and said, "Just do what you usually do, and it will be enough." "Yes." Zhao Yue replied with a nod before moving toward the empty clearing ahead. With a polite gesture, she invited Kong Xiao forward. "Please." Kong Xiao also quickly walked over. There was no exchange of words or taunting before the battle started, but with their dignity on their line, a tense and competitive atmosphere could be felt between the two. Kong Xiao did not use her bloodline ability, but as a top-notch genius and a blood reincarnation realm cultivator, she executed innumerable battle techniques one after another impeccably, making her movements appear like an elegant dance. On the other hand, Zhao Yue activated her unique constitution, causing a cold aura to grip the entire area. Beautiful snowflakes fell from the sky as a result of her ability. Her cultivation had reached Ancient Sage 2 Dan Great Philosopher Realm primary stage after the attempted assassination on the newly inaugurated Sovereign Chen Yong a month back. However, over the past month, she had received her teacher's direct pointers and an ample supply of blood reincarnation realm Ancient Sage blood, which had allowed her to reinforce her foundations to their limits and eventually reach Great Philosopher realm consummation. While she had not made too many breakthroughs within this period of time, it would be foolish if one simply assessed her by her cultivation. It was true that there was a fatal rift between her and Kong Xiao's cultivation, but through her strong foundations and her deep understanding of battle, she was actually able to stand her ground against Kong Xiao's pressing offense. The intense battle proceeded, and gradually, one could see anxiety seeping into Kong Xiao's eyes. There should have been an absolute gap in their strength, given her higher cultivation realm and her prowess as Kong Shi's descendant. Yet, in a fair battle where both of them were wielding no weapons, she was actually unable to claim the upper hand. How in the world did Zhongxian's 18-year-old or something direct disciple become so powerful? "This won't do. At this rate, even if I win, my honor will be sullied." She wanted to prove that her talents were far beyond any of Zhongxian's direct disciples, but if it was so difficult for her to defeat Zhao Yue despite her higher cultivation, it would actually be no different from suffering a defeat. Clenching her teeth tightly, she abruptly changed her movement technique, and in an instant, many after-images of her appeared on the battlefield. This was the battle technique that Kongsha had specially created for his descendants, as well as the strongest skill that she had at the moment. Massacre of the Eight Arms. Deng deng deng. Innumerable attacks flew forth from the seemingly omnipresent Kongsha Yarrow at a rapid pace. It was not long before Zhao Yue was cornered, and she was forced to retreat again and again. While Kongsha Yarrow had just achieved a breakthrough, there was no questioning that she was someone who had been through 4 ancient sage ordeals, making her an exceptionally powerful existence even among blood reincarnation realm cultivators. If not for Zhao Yue's superior combat experience, she would have already lost. Don't panic. You are only lacking in absolute strength at the moment. Since that's the case, all you have to do is achieve a breakthrough. With a flick of his finger, Zhongxian sent a droplet of the blood essence of the deity over to Zhao Yue. Who? Swallowing the blood droplet, Zhao Yue's cultivation immediately began surging. Hong Long. In less than 20 breaths, she had already overcome her current bottleneck to reach the blood reincarnation realm. With the tremendous surge in her strength as a result of her breakthrough, she released a burst of cold energy that swiftly sent Kongsha Yarrow flying into the distance before crashing onto the ground. I have lost, Kongsha Yarrow muttered with a pale face. She still had many more moves that she had not used, and she knew that she definitely would have been able to win if she had used her bloodline ability. However, this was not a life-and-death match, and she could not bring herself to use it at this moment. While the other party's battle techniques were not as profound as hers, every single one of her movements carried a deep conception behind it, making it hard to fathom her movements. On top of that, the other party seemed to be able to see through her flaws, intentionally striking at places where she could hardly defend. As a result, she was being slowly cornered. She could still rely on her superior cultivation to bridge the gap in their skills earlier on, but after Zhao Yue's cultivation reached the blood reincarnation realm, it had become a completely one-sided battle. It was truly laughable how she had looked down on this group of youths prior to the battle. In terms of talent, they were in no way beneath her. How is it? Are you still indignant at being called their little junior? Seeing how the proud genius of the Kungsu domain was still having trouble coming to terms with her defeat, Zhongxian suggested, if you feel that it's unfair because Zhao Yue is the strongest of them all, you can feel free to challenge the others. However, I'll have to ask you to suppress your cultivation in order to ensure fairness. This. Kongsha Yarrow turned to look at the rest of Zhongxian's direct disciples. Zheng Yang, Yuan Dao, Wei Ruyan, and the others were looking at her with excited gleams in their eyes. It seemed like they were dying to challenge and bully her so as to put her in place. It's fine. I'm willing to accept my position as the little junior. Kongsha Yarrow lowered her head and bowed down. Since they had all been groomed by the same teacher, it was likely that they would be similar in terms of strength. She had thought that she could suppress Zhao Yue with her superior cultivation, but that did not work in the end. She did not think that she would be able to best the rest of Zhongxian's students. Since she was not confident in her strength, there was no need for her to go through with that and humiliate herself. It would be best for her to just acknowledge it. That would be for the best, Zhongxian said. Zhao Yue, Zheng Yang, and the rest of you, from today on, Kongsha Yarrow will be your little junior, as well as my 9th direct disciple. You must take care of one another, got it? Yes, we'll listen to your teachings. The others clasped their fists and replied resoundingly. Seeing that even a descendant of Kongsha had ended up acknowledging Zhongxian as her teacher, ancient sage Yang Qing found himself rendered speechless. It was not until a long time later that he finally found his voice once more. Since Shi Yarrow has achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage and reached the blood reincarnation realm, she is qualified to become the new leader of the Kungsu domain and the 100 schools of philosophers. Since the Kungsu domain had been left behind by Kongsha himself, it went without saying that it should be managed by his descendants. In the past few years, he had just been taking care of the Kungsu domain and the 100 schools of philosophers in her place. Since Kongsha Yarrow had grown and matured, it was time for him to pass the baton back to her. Chapter 1906. Where did teacher go? The 100 schools of philosophers had always held Kongsha as its central figure, so there was no one who would voice any objections with Kong Xiao becoming their leader after her breakthrough to ancient sage. With this, it meant that Zhongxian and his 9 direct disciples had mankind, the otherworldly demonic tribe, and even the 100 schools of philosophers under their control. Knowing that she carried heavy responsibility on her shoulders, Kong Xiao turned to her teacher and asked, "Teacher, how should we deal with the matter concerning the Kungsu domain's seal?" Her teacher had said that he would be able to resolve everything as long as she acknowledged him as her teacher. "Let me give it a try." Zhongxian walked up to the seal, and with a thought, he took a golden page from his glabella. "Who?" The golden page flew over to the seal of the Kungsu domain and swiftly fused together with it. Following which, the seal quickly morphed into a massive, majestic gate. As soon as this massive majestic gate appeared, the roaring lightning and crackling flames in the sky, as if having met their nemesis, quickly dissipated. "What the crisis has been resolved just like that." Everyone was stupefied. They had been wondering where they could find Dimension Shatterer realm experts to save them from their plight, but who could have known that everything would be resolved so easily with a single golden page? If everything was that easy, why did Zhongxian not take it out earlier? Disregarding the looks of discontentment directed at him, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. "It seems like everything worked out as I thought." In truth, he had been rather uncertain about the limits of the Library of Heaven's Path's abilities. At the very start, the first limitation that he had found was that the Library of Heaven's Path was unable to see through the flaws of ancient sages. Perhaps it was because ancient sages were existences on par with the heavens, and that was its bottleneck. However, when Luo Ruoxin fused the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn with his Library of Heaven's Path prior to her departure, this bottleneck had been removed. Back then, he had wondered if the Library of Heaven's Path tier had already exceeded the heavens of the Master-Teacher continent, and from the earlier result that he had seen, that seemed to be the case. The heavens would not dare punish a higher existence than them, and the Library of Heaven's Path and the Golden Pages happened to be such existences. With a seal formed by a golden page viewed to be a higher existence than the heavens of the Master-Teacher continent, the result was clear. There was no way the heavens would dare pass their judgment upon the Kungsu domain anymore. As long as the seal formed by the golden page existed, the heavens of the Master-Teacher continent would dare not barge their way in. In fact, it didn't matter whether the Kungsu domain remained hidden or not anymore. Satisfied with the results, Zhongxian glanced at Kong Xiao and said, "I would like to pay a visit to the ancestral residence of the Kong clan." Kong Xiao quickly walked forward and led the way back to the Kungsu domain. The ancestral residence of the Kong clan was located in the vicinity of the great frontistery of Confucianism. Zhongxian strolled casually around it. The Kong clan had inherited Kongsha's heritage, and it aimed to push forward his ideals and cultivation techniques. There was a strong scholarly atmosphere drifting in the residence, and with every step that Zhongxian took, he could vaguely feel Kongsha's spirit and philosophy. After taking a look around the Kong clan, Zhongxian left the Kungsu domain. This time, he did not take his direct disciples with him, wanting to take a walk around. Kongsha had once toured around the entire Master-Teacher continent, and it had given him a much deeper comprehension of life. It was the spark that had led him to create the overpowered treasure known as the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn. Zhongxian wanted to see the Master-Teacher continent as it was for himself as well, and through doing so, he hoped to rediscover who he was. Every city that he went to, he would stop for a period of time to experience the local culture. With the threat of the otherworldly demonic tribe resolved, the world was in a rare state of peace. The Master-Teacher Pavilion had also been reorganized according to Yangsha's plans, destroying the previous aggregation of power through factions. At this moment, it had become an organization dedicated to imparting wisdom to the world. Under Zhongxian's instructions, his direct disciples had scattered around the world to spread his teachings. Many of his past students from the Hongyuan Master-Teacher Academy had traveled around the world to lecture as well. Often, those who heard Zhongxian's teaching through these indirect sources stumbled upon sudden bouts of enlightenment in the midst of the lectures, inducing a huge leap in their fighting prowess. As a result, their skills tended to surpass their peers. More often than not, those people would then become advocates of the Zhong school of thought. In a short period of time, Zhongxian's reputation as the #1 master teacher of the world grew greater and greater, such that the significance of his name was almost becoming synonymous with that of Kong Shi's. There was no one in this world who did not dream of hearing a lesson directly from Zhongxi himself, but it was as if the person in question had evaporated from the face of the world. No one knew where he was or where he had gone. It was not just the master-teacher pavilion who did not know of his whereabouts, even his direct disciples had no clue as to where their teacher had gone. No matter how they tried to contact him, there was simply no response. Just where has teacher gone? Zheng Yang sighed deeply. He had flown to the southernmost hemisphere of the master-teacher continent, but there was no one who had seen his teacher at all. Zhao Yue had flown to the extreme north, but her search had ended in futility. Zhongxian's 9 direct disciples had searched for 4 months, and they had scoured nearly every nook and cranny of the master-teacher continent, but their teacher remained nowhere to be seen. It's likely that our teacher is trying to find his own route and doesn't want to be disturbed right now. He should be fine, so there's no need for us to worry excessively about him, Wang Ying consoled. Wang Ying is right, Lu Chong said. What we should do right now is not search for our teacher but follow his instructions and impart his wisdom to all parts of the world. Furthermore, we must make sure to keep up with our cultivation. We should aim to reach blood reincarnation realm consummation as soon as possible so that we can share some of his burden. That's right. The others nodded in agreement. With their teacher's current strength, there was no one on the master-teacher continent who could possibly pose a threat to him anymore. As such, there was indeed no need for them to worry. Their time would be better used on accomplishing the mission that he had entrusted to them and raising their cultivation. At the very least, when the time came, they would not be mere baggage to their teacher anymore. While the world was searching for his whereabouts, Zhongxian was strolling leisurely in a remote town on the master-teacher continent. It had been almost half a year since he left the 100 schools of philosophers, which also meant that it had been 2 years since he had come to this world. Over the past half a year, he had seen countless joys and sorrows, reunions and separations. The laughter of happiness, the cries of misery, the warmth of an embrace, the coldness of a rejection. Taking in the emotions and experiences of those around him, Zhongxian felt as if he was living many different lives at once. Today marked the 3rd day since he had arrived in this little town, and going by his previous routine, it was about time for him to leave. Taking one last look at the small, peaceful town around him, Zhongxian was just about to leave through the gates when a commotion suddenly broke out along the streets. Many people were rushing toward a common destination in agitation. Hurry up, hurry up. A master teacher is here to spread his teaching. It's said that the master teacher is here to impart Zhongshi's wisdom. We have to make sure to record it well. As long as we listen carefully and learn well, we might get a chance to obtain greensprout wheat. That would really be great. Greensprout wheat is only cultivated by the 100 school of philosophers, and it can't be grown on the master-teacher continent, right? Do you know that blacksmith in the other village? Just the other day, he ate a single stalk of greensprout wheat and immediately achieved a breakthrough to the Zhongsha realm. That lucky bee ****. If I could achieve a breakthrough to the Zhongsha realm, I'd be laughing even in my sleep. Such discussions could be heard here and there. A lecture. Zhongxian noted before shaking his head with a smile. He had seen too many of such scenes in his journey over the past half a year, so he had completely lost interest listening to such stuff. There were many master teachers who used his name to bulk up their reputation. Some of their lectures were highly profound and induced deeper thoughts in the listener, whereas others were riddled with flaws. However, Zhongxian never stood up to intervene in any of those. He had chosen to take the role of a bystander in the world in order to witness the different aspects of the world with an open mind, so he had resolved himself to put aside his pride, beliefs, and even identity. I should move on to the next town, Zhongxian thought as he walked out of the city gates. However, what he caught sight of with a quick glance caused him to stop in his tracks. It's her. Zhongxian murmured as a beautiful profile came into his line of sight. Her demure silhouette remained unchanged even after the passing of 2 years, attracting eyes whenever she passed. However, she was no longer an ordinary teacher in a humble academy. She had become a true master teacher, and a 3-star one at that. Pleased to meet you. I am Shunbai Ryu, a 3-star master teacher. Standing on the stage, the young lady faced the agitated audience before her and revealed a charismatic smile. Chapter 1907 Ancient Sage. I shall become the world's teacher. 1. Shunbai Ryu was the beautiful teacher working at the Hongtian Academy whom Zhongxian had met after he transcended over to this world. When he left the Qianxian kingdom, it had felt like their paths had begun to diverge from one another, and they would never intersect ever again. Half a year earlier, when he returned to the Qianxian kingdom, he had only met Lu Zun. He honestly did not think that he would meet Shunbai Ryu here, and he did not expect her to have become a 3-star master teacher so swiftly. Her presence made Zhongxian halt in his footsteps as he turned around to look at the young lady on the stage. The young lady raised her hand and waited for the commotion amid the crowd to die down before continuing on. Zhong Laroche and I used to be colleagues. Colleagues? What? Is she saying that she knows Zhongshe? She is bragging, isn't she? All those who claim to spread Zhongshe's teaching say that they know Zhongshe one way or another in an attempt to add credibility to their word. Isn't that so? I never would have thought that a lady as pretty as her would stoop to such a level. As Zhongxian's reputation flourished, more and more people began passing themselves off as his students. Even a city as remote as this was not completely immune to this major trend. On the other hand, seeing the beautiful teacher who had always maintained a transcendental attitude toward worldly affairs talking about him in her first sentence, Zhongxian could not help but shake his head as a hint of disappointment surfaced in his eyes. In his mind, she had always been a person who was driven by self-improvement and thought little of fame and glory. He did not think that she would use his name in order to elevate her own standing. Heaving a deep sigh, Zhongxian was just about to leave when the young lady continued speaking. He has already become the world's teacher, and his teachings have spread far and wide. Many take pride in receiving the knowledge that he preaches, but I don't think that it's something enviable or particularly noble. Those words made Zhongxian halt in his footsteps once more. Most of the crowd, who had planned to leave after seeing that it was just another fraud using Zhongshe's name to her own advantage, quickly turned around with deep frowns on their foreheads. Zhongshe's accomplishments and wisdom had struck a deep chord with everyone in the world, making him the next idol of faith since Kongshe. Yet, she dared say that his work was not particularly noble. What did she mean by that? The atmosphere swiftly grew tense as displeased expressions appeared all over the crowd. The world is a diverse place. Take this little town that you live in for example. While we need people standing above the clouds, we also need those whose feet are planted on the ground. The master teachers who spread their teachings and bring wisdom to the world are worthy of respect, but so are the butchers who slaughter pigs, the vendors who barter their vegetables, and the merchants who ship goods from one place to another. Every occupation in the world has its own reason for existence. There's no need to classify them by honor or prestige. What truly makes the difference is whether we are willing to put our blood and sweat into what we do and whether we truly love what we do as well. Zhongshe loves the master-teacher occupation with a passion. He finds purpose in bringing wisdom to others, and he enjoys uncovering the secrets of the world. His diligence and passion paid off, allowing him to reach the peak of the master-teacher occupation. I am just an ordinary person. I have neither the talents nor capabilities that he possesses. However, that doesn't mean that I am a lesser being than him. I do what I can do to impart knowledge to my students and pass down the correct values to them. Unlike him, my lectures aren't great enough to reach every corner of the world. However, I can ensure that my own teachings will not lead my students down the wrong path, and whatever knowledge I pass down has been personally verified by myself, and I think that's enough. Living in this world, we must be cognizant of our own limits and walk down a path that is suited for us. Over the past 2 years, I have toured around the world and met many people. A lot of them take pride in living in the same era as the world's teacher, Zhongxian. Just like Kongshe's era, they believe that this era will usher mankind to greater prosperity than before and that we are blessed to be living in such times. I don't disagree with what they said, but while we are living in the era of hopes and dreams, does it necessarily mean that we stand a chance of rising to the top and becoming a powerful expert of the world? Bleak. It is a hopelessly bleak notion. Regardless of which era one lives in, only a small handful of people have the capacity to rise to the very top. The infuriated crowd slowly fell silent at those words. It was sad but cruel truth. Regardless of which era one was in, it was impossible for everyone to become an expert. Kongsha dreamt of a world where all humans were powerful, but this vision was bound to remain nothing more than a dream. It was something that could never be realized. There were simply too many limitations in the world that prevented it from happening. The scarce resources, the aptitude one was born with, the intense competition among cultivators. It was because power was always held in the hands of the minority that becoming an expert was something that so many desired. I never thought that she would come to such a realization. Zhong Xian was stunned as well. He had thought that Shunbai Ryu was using his reputation to elevate her standing, but who could have known that she would be using this to tell a powerful story to the crowd? What was scary was not a lack in talent but the failure to realize one's limitations. If a person who only had the ability of an ordinary soldier forced their way to become a commander, they would be hurting not just themselves. Stop listening to her *T. I have heard that there are those who aren't too talented among Zhongsha's students, but all of them eventually became powerful expert. Indeed. As long as we find a good teacher, we'll be able to rise to greater heights. Do you expect us to believe that you are Zhongsha's colleague just because you said so? All of the figures whom Zhongsha is associated with are people far beyond our league. How could a mere 3-star master teacher like you possibly know him? After the brief moment of astonished silence came a massive uproar. Shunbai Ryu's words had pricked the self-esteem of the crowd. They could not accept what she was saying. Failure could always be attributed to timing and luck. An author could always say that their work was meant to go down in history as the greatest work ever made, but due to the editor's lack of foresight, their talent ended up being buried, resulting in them being unable to receive even a contract. Having expected such an uproar from the crowd, Shunbai Ryu raised her hand and continued calmly. I know that my words have hurt many of you, but touch your heart. Do you believe that my words are all empty? I know that I can't begin to compare to Zhongsha, the respected world's teacher, but how many of you believe that he is truly happy with his life? The greater one's strength, the greater one's responsibility. Over the past year, he has changed the rules of the master-teacher continent, quelled the otherworldly demonic tribe, and subordinated the 100 schools of philosophers. But which of these accomplishments didn't require him to risk his life? If you were in his position, and all you wanted was to enjoy the luxuries of power, would you really have braved through danger to achieve all of that? Most of those who had spoken up against Shunbai Ryu earlier were struck speechless once more. Indeed. If they enjoyed Zhongsha's standing and talent, would they really have been willing to charge into the midst of the otherworldly demonic tribe to quell them or confront the legendary 100 schools of philosophers? You might think that Zhongsha is a lofty figure far beyond any of you, but back when I was working in the same academy as him, he was a teacher who was despised and looked down by others. He scored a 0 for his teacher qualification examination, so he was nearly expelled from the school. Yet, despite these challenges, he never gave up nor shied away. A step at a time, he eventually rose to his current prominence. If you were in his place, would you have been able to overcome the odds? Shunbai Ryu asked. Zhong Xian's life had already been compiled into books and spread across the entire world. His life had been fraught with danger, but none of the challenges that he had faced had ever convinced him to give up. If they had been in his place, would they really have been able to do the same? Most of those amid the crowd pondered the question, but they eventually shook their heads in response. For those who were weak-minded, the scorn that Zhong Xian had received at Hongqian Academy would have been more than enough for them to give up and drown their sorrows with alcohol. For those who were a little more strong-willed, the Tianwu Kingdom would probably have been where their journey ended. They would never have been able to overcome all of those obstacles that Zhong Xian had faced to live the brilliant life that he did. It was easy to envy others, but the experiences that others had gone through might have been something that they would not have been able to survive. Your own life, your own decisions. You have to recognize who you truly are in order to make the decisions that will make your life a meaningful one, Zhong Xian thought. Shunbai Ryu's words had truly left a mark in him. It was as if someone had ignited all of the experiences that he had been through over the past half a year, causing a raging flame to burn within him. Be it famed mountains or beautiful lakes, the warmth and callousness of human emotions, everything that he had witnessed and been involved in had become a part of his memories. Those memories strung together to form a complete him. They drifted into the sky of the master-teacher continent and overlooked the world, as if a transcendent being. In an instant, Zhongxian seemed to enter a deep state of concentration. A lot of the confusion in his heart vanished, and the cultivation that had remained stagnant over the past half a year abruptly surged forth like water charging through a collapsed dam. Chapter 1908 Ancient Sage. I shall become the world's teacher too. The reason Zhongxian had chosen to cast himself aside and tour the world was due to the confusion in his heart. He had found himself lost, and he needed some directions. He had looked at Kongsha's records, but their lives had been vastly different. As two completely different people, he could not hope to experience the same things as Kongsha even if he forced himself to retrace Kongsha's footsteps. He knew that becoming the world's teacher was the way for him to become an ancient sage, but how could he do it? The world was such a huge place, and it was governed by its own laws. It was not as if his words could reach the heavens, so how could he become the world's teacher? Unable to make sense out of this, he had found himself falling into a stalemate. No matter how he struggled, he had been unable to advance any further at all. Of course, he knew that this confusion was something that all cultivators had to eventually face in their lifetime, but this was a hurdle that he had no idea where he could begin to work on. All along, he had been reliant on the library of Heaven's Path for his cultivation. He would collect books and compile them together, and if required, he would edit them accordingly. All in all, none of what he had practiced so far could be said to be his own creation. While he had been able to advance swiftly through this manner, it had also become his limitation. He was able to modify any cultivation technique until he had ensured that it was completely flawless, but the reliance on this ability had made him unable to cultivate without any cultivation technique to refer to. This was his greatest flaw, and he was suffering as a result of it. Even the heavens were flawed, so there was nothing in this world that came without compromise. Thus, he had set out on his journey to see the world. He did not know how long it would take, and it did not know where it would lead him to, but it was all he could do. This journey had been an eye-opener. It had allowed him to understand many aspects of the world that he had never noticed before. However, when he heard Shun Bai Ayu's words, it made him realize something. The answer that he had been searching for over the past half a year was not something that he could find anywhere else in the world. It existed only in himself. All he had to do was be the best him. Why should he be so bothered with the experiences of others? Everyone in the world had their own path to tread on, so there was no need for him to conform to others. What he had to do was stay loyal to his own heart and continue paving his path forward. That would be enough. Even if there was no perfect cultivation technique for him to cultivate and he could not truly become the world's teacher, he would just have to ensure that he remained the perfect him, and that was enough. Thank you, Shun Bai Ayu. Feeling the changes in his body, Zhongxian smiled. He had found his own answer, and he was finally ready to achieve a breakthrough to ancient sage. The surroundings fell silent. Zhongxian's words were not particularly loud, but they attracted the attention of the crowd in an instant. Hearing that voice, Shun Bai Ayu turned her gaze over, and her eyes widened in astonishment. Zhong Larosha, what are you doing here? If Zhongxian did not want others to recognize him, not even his closest students would see through his disguise. But out of gratitude for Shun Bai Ayu, he did not want to conceal his identity to her. As such, the young lady was able to tell that he was the despised and scorned teacher who had been on the verge of being expelled from Hongtian Academy 2 years ago, Zhongxian. His appearance did not seem to have changed by too much over the past 2 years, other than his taller profile, his smoother skin, and his deeper eyes. It has been a very long time since we last met, Zhongxian replied with a warm smile as he slowly made his way up to the stage. Yes, it has been a long time. Shun Bai Ayu nodded as her body trembled in agitation. She had thought that with the difference in their standings, there was no way that they would ever meet again. Who could have known that their reunion would come so abruptly? The young man was just the same as ever. His posture was without airs, and his smile was still so innocent. Zhongshe. She mentioned earlier that she was colleagues with Zhongshe, and now, she's acting so shocked all of a sudden. Is she trying to say that the fellow over there is the world's teacher, Zhongshe? It's one thing for her to feed us with so much CR*P earlier, but to make such a bold claim, is she trying to insult our intelligence? She really is trying to grind our tolerance down to the very last bit, isn't she? If he really is Zhongshe, I am the head of the Master-Teacher Pavilion. How could a lofty figure like Zhongshe possibly come to a remote town like ours? This woman might be pretty, but she sure has a devious heart. The two of them did not try to conceal their words, and their exchange caused the crowd below to explode as if someone had thrown gunpowder in the midst of burning flames. While Zhongshe was a figure whom all of them respected, they also understood that the other party was a figure extremely far away from them. It had never crossed their minds that they would ever be able to meet Zhongshe in person. Yet, that young lady had actually called out Zhong Laroche so abruptly after making such a speech. Was she trying to say that this humble-looking fellow was actually Zhongxian? You must be trying to make a monkey out of us. We can accept your bragging, but to sully Zhongshe's honor. Unforgivable. Don't you know that passing yourself off as Zhongshe is a taboo of the Master-Teacher Pavilion? You must be punished for your insolence, or else how can the Master-Teacher Pavilion establish its credibility in the world? A master-teacher amid the crowd cried out in fury. Indeed. Catch those two despicable scoundrels. Catch them and skin. Another person amid the crowd shouted. But before he could finish his words, a quivering voice suddenly echoed in the air. Shut up. What's going on over there? The infuriated crowd looked at the stage, and what they saw nearly blew their minds. The young man passing off as Zhongshe, with a gentle smile on his face, was slowly rising into the air. It was a common fact that flight was an ability exclusive to cultivators who had reached the saint realm. Could the imposter before them actually be a saint expert? But before they could figure out what was going on, a loud rumbling echoed in the air as countless ominous clouds gushed over. The span of the ominous clouds was massive. It swiftly covered the entire town, but it still continued to grow relentlessly into the distance. It did not take long for it to extend all the way to the horizon, plunging everywhere into darkness. This is a cultivation ordeal. How could there be such a massive cultivation ordeal? It's rumored that even the most formidable ancient sage ordeal only covers up to 100,000 mu, but this is at least 1,000,000 mu, right? The crowd below was completely stunned. To be able to summon such a huge cultivation ordeal. Could that young man really be Zhongshe? As this doubt was raised, the crowd swiftly fell silent. Indeed. Other than Zhongshe, who could cause such a spectacular uproar in the world? At the Glacier Plain Court. Mother, rest assured. I'll take care of my body, and I'll make sure not to act recklessly. A young lady with features reminiscent of a delicate ice sculpture reassured a middle-aged lady with a gentle smile. She was the court chief of the Glacier Plain Court, Zhao Ya. The middle-aged lady before her was the holy maiden of the previous generation, her mother. Back then, after the conflict between her teacher and the other major powers was resolved in Empire Alliance City, she had quickly returned to the Glacier Plain Court to release her mother. She had brought her mother back to the Tianxian Kingdom to reunite with her father for a while before taking them all to the Glacier Plain Court. You keep going into seclusion to cultivate, neither eating nor drinking. A middle-aged man walked over as he shook his head disapprovingly. Your mother and I are afraid that you are pushing yourself too much. He was Zhao Ya's father, the lord of Tianxian Kingdom's Bayou City, Zhao Feng. After Zhongshe disappeared, their daughter had gone around the world searching for him desperately. When she was unable to find him even after some time, she had finally decided to return to the Glacier Plain Court. But as soon as she returned, she had devoted her time to cultivating, neglecting to sleep and everything else. It pained his heart to see his daughter living in such a manner. While their daughter had reached a level far beyond what they could imagine, their daughter's attitude of recklessly plunging into any danger as long as it could raise her cultivation was a cause for concern. They felt that she would eventually come to harm as a result of this. I'm fine. I just wish to be able to stand before my teacher proudly when he finally returns so that he won't be disappointed in me, Zhao Wei replied with a smile. The memories that she shared with her teacher flashed through her head and filled her with strength once more. She was just about to placate her parents before returning to her cultivation when her eyebrows suddenly shot up. She hurriedly raised her head, only to see that the distant sky had already been covered by large swathes of ominous clouds, and it was swiftly creeping toward the glacier plain court. 1 mu equals 666. 6 square meters. Chapter 1909 Ancient Sage. I shall become the world's teacher 3. This is. Zhao Wei immediately shot to her feet in shock. This was because she realized that even with her current cultivation, she was unable to see the entire span of the ominous cloud. Due to her hard work over the past half a year, her cultivation had already reached blood reincarnation realm consummation. Of course, she was still nowhere close to pushing for a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm, but there was no doubt that her strength was more than enough to put her at the top of the world. Despite that, she was actually unable to see the end of the ominous clouds. Did this not mean that the ominous clouds extend over several 100,000 li? What in the world is this? How could there be such a huge congregation of dark clouds here? Zhao Feng and his wife also swiftly noticed that something was amiss, and they were horrified by what they were seeing. It seems to be a cultivation ordeal. Teacher. That's right, my teacher must be back. Zhao Wei's eyes lit up in excitement. Not in the mood to cultivate anymore, she quickly rushed in the direction of where the ominous clouds had come from. Other than her teacher, there was no one in the world who was able to summon such a huge congregation of cloud. He was the one and only one in the world. A teacher seeks to impart knowledge and clarify doubts. While our combat master hall does not have the capacity to impart wisdom, we can still demystify combat techniques and fighting skills. This is aligned with the responsibilities of a teacher, and that's also why we are a subsidiary of the Master Teacher Pavilion instead of a separate organization. Standing in front of an army of 10,000, Zheng Yang looked at the newly recruited combat masters sternly as he spoke. Over the past half a year, the Combat Master Hall had grown significantly stronger, especially after Zheng Yang passed down the knowledge that he had received from Zhongxian. The members of the Combat Master Hall were stronger than ever, each of them wielding the strength to fend off hundreds of cultivators simultaneously. We understand. The crowd nodded in agitation. All of them had heard of the incredible deeds of the Hall Master and his teacher, and they looked forward to becoming a part of the legend they were creating. It was their dearest wish to follow behind this esteemed young man, and their wish was coming true. Seeing that everyone was pumped up, Zheng Yang stopped his speech right there. All right, we shall start the training for today. He was just about to gesture for the instructors to begin when he suddenly raised his head and saw darkness creeping in from afar. Those dark clouds. Is it a cultivation ordeal? Zheng Yang was stunned for a moment before realization struck him. It's my teacher. He's going to achieve a breakthrough to ancient sage. With a slight push against the ground, he vanished right from the spot. In the capital of the otherworldly demonic tribe, Liu Yang was seated upon a high throne, looking down upon his subjects. With a cold voice carrying unquestionable authority, he commanded, I have mentioned this far too many times, and it bores me to repeat myself time and time again. All otherworldly demons are to maintain friendly relations with the humans, and conflicts are to be avoided at all costs. Anyone who infringes on this will be killed without fail. Do I still have to teach you what to do? The otherworldly demons quickly kneeled on the ground fearfully and replied, Yes, Your Majesty. We'll carry out your will. Shortly after his inauguration, the new sovereign Chen Yong had implemented a series of swift but severe reforms. Under his efforts, the otherworldly demons were starting to accept their coexistence with the humans, and the initial tension between the two races was starting to calm down. Of course, a feud that had lasted over tens of thousands of years could not be halted so easily, but at the very least, the battles had stopped for the time being. Eventually, time would wash away the hostility between the two races, ushering in an era of stability and harmony. Not to mention, coexistence with the humans was not without benefits for the otherworldly demons either. The otherworldly demons gained access to the precious resources traded on the master-teacher continent, and they were also able to develop their industries through implementing the technologies of the humans. Having experienced the benefits of coexistence, there were some factions among the otherworldly demonic tribe who were starting to openly support the new sovereign Chen Yong's policies. More importantly, Sovereign Chen Yong had started pushing out a new set of cultivation techniques that allowed otherworldly demons to cultivate swiftly even if they did not devour the flesh and souls of master teachers and humans. With the mutual benefits of the two races aligned, the friction between them lessened significantly. "All right, we shall end the court here. You are dismissed." With a wave of his hand, Liu Yang stood up to walk away. As a sign of respect, the subjects were only allowed to leave after the emperor had left the royal court. However, at that moment, ominous clouds suddenly swarmed over from afar, covering the sky in a flash. "Teacher!" Liu Yang's eyes reddened in agitation at this sight. Without any hesitation, he flicked his wrist and tore open a spatial passageway. He walked into the spatial passageway and disappeared from the astonished eyes of his subjects. After his hard work over the past half a year, the situation in the otherworldly demonic tribe had finally stabilized. He finally had the rights to pursue his teacher once more. The same situation was occurring in the 100 schools of philosophers' Kungsu domain. Kong Shiyaro looked at the gloomy sky as her body trembled in excitement. Was her teacher finally appearing once more after his long absence? "I'll leave the Kungsu domain to you for the time being. I'm heading out to take a look." Without waiting for the other party to respond, Kong Shiyaro rushed toward the master-teacher continent. After spending 6 months in anonymity, Zhongxian finally caused a huge uproar in the world with his breakthrough. "It's him. It really is him. There's no doubt, there's no one other than Zhongshe who could pull something like this off. To think that we wouldn't be able to recognize him when he was right before our eyes, and we even attempted to capture him. My gosh, I actually got a chance to see Zhongshe's splendor with my own eyes. Now, I can die with no regrets." As the truth dawned upon those in the little town, countless silhouettes gathered around the stage stiffened in shock. Previously, when Shunbai Ryu mentioned that she was Zhongshe's colleague, there had not been a single person among the crowd who believed her. When she said that the young man standing before them was actually Zhongshe, they had scoffed at her words, thinking that they were utter nonsense. All of it turned out to be real. The incredible figure who had won the world's respect and admiration was really standing right before them in the flesh. "He's just the same as ever. He's always the brightest one in the crowd," Shunbai Ryu remarked with a helpless smile. For as long as she had known this young man, he had always caught everyone's gaze. She had thought that he would tone down after coming this far, but the other party turned out to be the same as ever. It was as if he did not know the concepts of humility and low profile. Zhongxian was oblivious to the uproar among the crowd. He was carefully ruminating over his new enlightenment, and it felt as if the rays of the dawn sun had pierced through the darkness in his mind, showing him a new route. This feeling was so strong that it touched even the depths of his soul. "So, this is what I've been pursuing all this while," Zhongxian muttered with a faint smile as he looked at the endless dark clouds and lightning bolts gathering around him. It was apparent that the cultivation ordeal that he was going to go through this time would be highly destructive, commanding a might far beyond what he had ever experienced before. Sila. Lightning bolts and heavenly flames condensed together to form innumerable massive weapons, and each of these weapons darted right toward Zhongxian. Just from the sheer momentum, it felt like not even Dimension Shatterer realm experts would stand a chance against this fearsome might. In fact, it felt like it had far exceeded everything in the world. It was a transcendental force that was bound to bring destruction upon its target, and not even the newly enlightened Zhongxian would stand a chance against it. But, since he did not stand a chance against it, why should he bother fighting against it? Without the slightest change in his expression, Zhongxian parted his lips. "Dissipate." His voice pierced through the void, echoing into the high heavens. Huala. As if they had encountered their greatest nemesis, the weapons made of lightning bolts and heavenly flames swiftly disintegrated into nothing. At the same time, under his command, the ominous clouds slowly scattered, returning a clear sky to the world. Previously, he would still have had to utilize all kinds of techniques in order to overcome his cultivation ordeal, but with his current ability, he was actually able to resolve it with a single word. It was as if the heavens of the master-teacher continent had submitted to him. He had become the ruler of the world, and his words dictated the future course of the world. This was the ability of the word of law. A breakthrough to ancient sage meant surpassing the world in a certain law, but the current Zhongxian had gone far beyond that. His entire existence had surpassed the limitations of the world, making him a being who stood above the heavens. He had become a transcendental being that existed beyond the three realms, unrecognized by the five elements. As the ancient sage ordeal vanished, overwhelming energy gushed out from his body and pierced into the heavens, suppressing everything in the area. Boom! Unable to suppress his zhenqi any longer, Zhongxian's aura began surging forth. In an instant, from sempiternal realm consummation, he had already reached Ancient Sage. Ancient Sage 1 Dan Bloodline Continuance Realm, Ancient Sage 2 Dan Great Philosopher Realm, Ancient Sage 3 Dan Blood Reincarnation Realm. All of the accumulation prior to his breakthrough was showing its effects now. In less than 10 breaths, he had already pushed through 3 realms, rising all the way to Blood Reincarnation Realm consummation. In a sense, his achievement was even more fearsome than Kong Xiao's. In fact, not even Kong Shi's breakthrough had been so swift. Feeling vigorous energy coursing through his body, a smile slowly etched itself onto Zhongxian's lips as he gazed down upon the world as if an immortal of the heavens. At that moment, his profile looked ever so inviolable and authoritative. A long silence lingered in the world as the sky cleared up completely, following which, a majestic voice boomed across the world. From this day onward, I am the world's teacher. The 3 realms are namely the heavens, earth, and hell. Chapter 1910 Zhao Yue's unique nature. From the moment he achieved a breakthrough to Ancient Sage, Zhongxian realized that he was already an existence that towered above the master-teacher continent's heavens, becoming the world's teacher in reality. Every word and action from him could influence the will of the heavens and even correct them. This was the same ability that Kong Shi's descendants wielded, word of law. He had thought that he had finally diverged from Kong Shi's path and was no longer affected by the latter, but who could have known that he was still walking on the latter's footsteps? It was as if every step that he took brought him closer to becoming the next Kong Shi. Kong Shi must have reached such a realm in the ancient era for him to bestow upon his descendants the ability to warp the laws of the world through their words. Zhongxian sighed deeply before shaking the matter out of his mind. It should not matter whether he was tracing Kong Shi's footsteps or not. As long as he was giving his all in everything that he did, what was the point in frustrating over such matters? With clenched fists, Zhongxian began to carefully sense the changes in his body. Even though he had only reached the blood reincarnation realm thus far, with his current strength, he was confident that he could crush the deity that had appeared previously in the Kungsu domain with a single finger. It seemed like the many times that he had suppressed his cultivation had not been in vain. The strength that he had acquired as soon as he made the breakthrough was really beyond imagination. Catcher. The painting that Zhongxian was holding tightly in his hand suddenly disintegrated into ashes. In order to fuel his previous breakthrough, not only did he use up all of the eon of ancient sage contained in the painting, he also devoured all of the ancient sage blood that he had acquired from the 2 deities that he had killed. At that very moment, he felt like he had reverted to his usual poor self. Wealth sure was transient. Farewell. With a tap of his finger, he imparted a modified cultivation technique into the head of the young lady before turning around and vanishing from sight. Farewell. Zhongxian. Shunbai Yu's eyes reddened as her body shook non-stop. She knew that this parting truly represented the divergence of their pathways. They would never meet one another ever again. Meanwhile, after confirming the identity of the young man in the sky, the crowd in the town swiftly got to their knees and kneeled down, paying respects to Zhongxi. As expected of the world's teacher, every action that he did was a legend in itself. Flying to a private location where ordinary cultivators could no longer see him, Zhongxian halted his flight and cast a cursory glance around him. With a smile on his lips, he said, "Come out. Teacher." Zhao Yue, Wang Ying, Liu Yang, Zheng Yang, Yuan Dao, Lu Chong, Wei Ruyan, Zhong Zhouxiao, and Kong Xiao. His 9 direct disciples swiftly appeared from the shadows and bowed down to him. Over the past 2 years, he had accepted all 9 of them as his direct disciples. Each of them had eventually climbed to the top of the master-teacher continent, becoming figures that stood at the very peak of the pyramid. "Come at me all at once. I want to see how much you have grown," Zhongxian said with his hands behind his back. The 9 direct disciples were stunned for a moment before they nodded simultaneously. Hoo. The 9 of them immediately encircled Zhongxian before charging at him from all directions. Over the past half a year, all 9 of them had made significant advances in their cultivation. Even the one with the lowest cultivation in the past, Yuan Dao, had successfully reached Great Philosopher Realm Intermediate stage after his 2 ancient sage ordeals. As for the others, such as Zhao Yue, Kong Xiao, Zheng Yang, and Liu Yang, they had all reached the blood reincarnation realm. With their combined prowess, they wielded the power to seal even spacetime itself. Had the deity from before come under their collaborative offense, he would have found it hard to stand his ground. But when the target was Zhongxian, their seemingly devastating attacks were easily kept at bay by the mere protective layer of Zhenqi shrouding his body. In fact, as long as Zhongxian willed it, he could move at a speed so quick that even they would be unable to perceive his movements. At this point, the Zhong clan's bloodline was completely useless to him. Time acceleration had become an ability that he could activate with a mere thought. The group fought for a while, and it did not take long for Zhongxian to ascertain how powerful he and each of his direct disciples were. Feeling that there was no point in prolonging the fight any longer, he raised his forefinger and tapped it lightly in front of him. Break. Voila. All 9 of them were sent retreating simultaneously with pale faces. It was no exaggeration to say that they were the most powerful team of cultivators on the master-teacher continent at the moment, but to think that they would not be able to withstand a single strike from their teacher's finger. Zhao Yue and Zheng Yang, you have worked hard. I can tell that you have improved a lot over the past half a year. The rest of you too. Well done. However, Xiao, you will have to work a little harder. Even though you aren't the weakest at the moment, your advancement is sorely lagging behind, Zhongxian pointed out. He could tell that his students had been working extremely hard based on their improvements. In contrast, the one who had been growing the slowest turned out to be the last direct disciple that he had accepted, Kong Xiao. He had not really given her any pointers prior to his departure, resulting in the latter's cultivation advancing only from blood reincarnation realm intermediate stage to advanced stage despite having half a year to herself. As one of Zhongxian's direct disciples, such a rate of progress could be said to be abysmal. Kong Xiao was rendered speechless. She was painfully aware of the fact that she was the one who had made the least progress over the past half a year. Previously, she had thought that, with her Kong clan bloodline, even if she was no match for Zhao Yue, Zheng Yang, and the others at the moment, she should be able to catch up with them in no time. Yet, the others were pulling further away from her instead. This made her realize that the incredible gifts that the Kong clan's bloodline had bestowed her would only get her so far. It was sheer naivety for her to think that her talent would be enough to offset the effort put in by her seniors who were desperately climbing forward with everything they had. If she did not desperately claw forward with everything she had, she would only end up being cast behind the others. Not to mention that her teacher was the world's teacher. There was no way the disciples of the world's teacher would be bound by the mere limitations of talent. All right, this is what I have comprehended over the past half a year. I'll impart everything to you now. As for how much you are able to comprehend, it's entirely up to you. With a tap of his finger, Zhongxian imparted the insights that he had received during his breakthrough to ancient sage into the minds of the others. At their level of cultivation, there was no longer a need to bring them around step by step anymore as if they were amateurs. Rather, all he had to do was grant them the resources and allow them to reach enlightenment on their own. One's cultivation lay with oneself. As a teacher, his role was just to bring them through the dorsal and point out plausible paths to them. As for how far they could go, that was down to them. It was also for this reason that Zhongxian had previously encouraged them to seek out their own paths. If not, They would not have accrued precious experiences that would allow them to grow and mature as people. The 9 direct disciples swiftly scanned through Zhongxian's impartation, and excited gleams sparkled in their eyes. With his insights, they would be able to quicken their rate of cultivation and reinforce the foundations of their cultivation further. Zhongxian knew that it would take some time for his direct disciples to assimilate what they had just received, but he did not have much time to waste. Thus, he spoke up. I'm intending to head to the formation in the Kungsu domain. The rest of you should come along with me. The 9 of them quickly nodded in response. Thus, they made their way over to the Kungsu domain, and within 10 minutes, they were already on the elevated platform beneath the formation leading to the Azure. After Zhongxian had repaired the formation, all of the rifts that had appeared previously had been completely mended, making this place seem almost no different from any other. The mercury-like energy that had seeped through previously had also diffused into the surroundings to harmless concentration levels. From the looks of it, it seemed like the formation was doing its job well. Through the personnel guarding the formation, he confirmed that no deities had been able to slip through the formation in the past half a year, and he heaved a sigh of relief. On the other side of the formation above is the Azure, and it is filled with an extremely heavy spiritual energy. It's highly dangerous, but I believe that it's the key to achieving a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm. Would you like to try and see if you are able to absorb it? Zhongxian tapped his finger lightly as he spoke, and a small black hole appeared in the formation. A gush of heavy energy poured down, causing the elevated platform to creak under the weight. Since he had achieved a breakthrough to Ancient Sage, it was about time for him to leave the Master-Teacher continent and take a look at the higher dimensions. Otherwise, he would never be able to find Luo Ruoxin, and their fate would be severed thereon. However, in order to enter the Azure, he would have to first grow accustomed to the mercury-like spiritual energy. The reason he had brought his direct disciples there as well was because he wanted them to get a taste of the mercury-like spiritual energy so that they would be wary of it. TZZZZZ. Hearing Zhongxian's words, the 9 direct disciples each took in a small bit of the mercury-like spiritual energy, and the next moment, they felt as if their meridians were going to collapse under the weight. They hurriedly drove their zhenqi to reinforce the resilience of their meridians. This spiritual energy was simply too fearsome. Even though they had all reached Ancient Sage, it was still beyond their means to deal with. Teacher, I think I am able to absorb this spiritual energy. Just as Zhongxian was sighing in disappointment, a voice suddenly sounded. He quickly turned his head over and saw Zhao Wei looking at him with a confused expression. The mercury-like spiritual energy was slowly flowing into her body, but her body was not showing any signs of rejection. Chapter 1911 Zhao Wei's Breakthrough. Continue cultivating, don't stop. Zhongxian urged as he activated his Eye of Insight to take a closer look at the young lady. As the mercury-like spiritual energy flowed through her body, it refined her zhenqi, inducing her cultivation to grow at a visible rate. Within a short 10 minutes, she was making advancements equivalent to an entire day of cultivation. It's the altered meridians. Zhongxian came to a realization. Previously, Zhao Wei's meridians had been completely destroyed while trying to save him, so Zhongxian had used the vines of the Dongshu gourd to construct a new meridian network for her. This mercury-like spiritual energy should have been enough to crush the meridians of any cultivator with ease, but somehow, this problem did not exist for Zhao Wei. It was a wonder what the vines truly were. They were actually able to absorb such heavy spiritual energy without causing a strain on Zhao Wei's body at all by nullifying the damage it would have usually caused on normal cultivators through its sheer resilience. A few moments later, Zhao Wei halted her cultivation before turning to look at her teacher with agitation in her eyes. Teacher, I think that I should be able to easily achieve a breakthrough to Dimension Shatterer realm as long as I continue absorbing the heavy spiritual energy. Her cultivation had already reached Blood Reincarnation realm consummation due to her hard work over the past half a year, but all of a sudden, she had found that she could not scale any higher than that. It was as if she had already reached the highest peak of the Master-Teacher continent, and there was no path leading to higher grounds for her to take anymore. It was the world's bottleneck. Yet, when she absorbed the spiritual energy, She actually felt an impetus to make a breakthrough, and it filled her with disbelief. "I see," Zhongxian remarked with a nod. He did not say too much in response to Zhao Yue's situation, but he had already roughly figured out what was going on. The spiritual energy of the master-teacher continent differed far too much from the azure in terms of density and quality. The bottleneck preventing cultivators from reaching the Dimension Shatterer realm was like a pair of resilient steel gates that an ordinary stream could never push open. It required powerful currents and devastating waves striking on the steel gates in order to break them apart. "It's as I thought. The key to achieving a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm is to absorb this Mercury-like energy." Zhongxian nodded affirmatively, more certain than ever of his conjecture. This might also be the reason for the vast difference in the strength of those on the Master-Teacher continent and the deities descending from the azure. They had been constantly nourished by the Mercury-like spiritual energy, so achieving a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm was not too difficult a feat to them anymore. It was for this reason that the 100 schools of philosophers had devoted their efforts to developing the green sprout wheat to improve the constitution of ordinary civilians. Once their constitution reached a level suited for them to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy, mankind would take a qualitative step forward in its level of existence. Continue absorbing the spiritual energy. Try to achieve a breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm if possible, Zhongxian instructed. Zhao Yue nodded. She quickly drove her zhenqi to its limits as she devoured the Mercury-like spiritual energy greedily. On the other hand, the other 8 direct disciples tried to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy once more, but they were unable to absorb it like their first senior. Thus, they could only sigh deeply and look at their first senior in envy. Knowing that cultivation was not something that could be rushed, Zhongxian did not rush Zhao Yue. Instead, using both the Eye of Insight and the Library of Heaven's Path, he made sure to take note of Zhao Yue's current condition carefully, fearing that something would happen to her. Fortunately, due to Zhao Yue's diligence and patience, the foundations of her cultivation were extremely firm. Her cultivation grew without any problems, and within half a day, she was already knocking on the bottleneck keeping her from the Dimension Shatterer realm. Break. Once the young lady had built up sufficient momentum, her eyebrows shot up as she released a furious cry. In an instant, her zhenqi gushed through her meridians and tore down the bottleneck limiting her, causing her cultivation to rise to the much-desired level of the Dimension Shatterer realm. The ordeal of lightning armament swiftly descended upon Zhao Yue as the heavens desperately tried to claw her apart. However, with her current strength and Zhongxian's pointers, she managed to overcome the crisis safely. Nevertheless, the cultivation ordeal still left many wounds on her that would take some time to recover from. "Is this the level that you reached back then?" Zhongxian asked. Vicious had reached the Dimension Shatterer realm before, which had resulted in his widespread fame in the otherworldly demonic tribe as an immortal's envoy. It was with such strength that he had been able to force Kongsha into a corner multiple times. Vicious nodded. "Through absorbing the heavy energy coming from the azure, I was able to push my cultivation past the Dimension Shatterer realm, but I was only able to push to primary stage. Anything beyond that is practically impossible. Based on my research back then, one has to enter the azure and tap into the natural energies in that world to alter one's fundamental constitution in order to advance one's cultivation any further than that. Otherwise, one will be doomed to be trapped at that realm till one's death." "You were unable to advance any further than that?" Zhongxian was stunned. He quickly turned to Zhao Yue and asked her the same question. Zhao Yue closed her eyes to sense her current physical condition before shaking her head and replying, "Teacher, it seems like reaching Dimension Shatterer realm primary stage is really my limit. If I wish to cultivate any further than this, while the rejection of the heavens does play a part as well, more importantly, it seems like my body has reached the limits of its capacity. I am unable to accept any more heavy spiritual energy." It was similar to the idea of how a pond could only store a limited amount of water depending on its size. If someone attempted to pour more water into an already full pond, the excess would just flow into the surroundings. If one wanted the pond to reserve a greater amount of water, the only way was to expand the pond. As the size of the pond increased, the amount of water that it could store would naturally increase as well. The dimension one lives in does affect one's constitution too, Zhongxian thought. He had thought that as long as he had an ample supply of the Mercury-like spiritual energy, he would be able to continuously absorb it and advance his cultivation swiftly. However, it seemed like his thoughts were too naive. If it was that easy, Kongshe would not have had to leave the master-teacher continent. Zhongxian clenched his fists and thought, let me give it a try again and see if I'm able to absorb it. Previously, when he tried to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy, he had not achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage, and the resilience of his body had still been sorely lacking. However, after his breakthrough, he wielded strength that far surpassed that of even Zhao Yue. Could his body possibly be able to adapt to this Mercury-like spiritual energy and allow him to absorb it too? After all, he had altered his meridian network, and it was even more profound than Zhao Yue's. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian quickly sat on the ground and closed his eyes. Chapter 1912 The Importance of Meridians TZZZZZZZ. The Mercury-like spiritual energy swiftly poured into Zhongxian's meridians through his acupoints. Catcher, catcher. But as if someone had injected lead into his body, his meridians immediately began cracking as he felt an incredible weight trying to pull him down from within. He hurriedly drove his Heaven's Path Zhenqi to repair the cracks and reinforce his meridians to withstand the Mercury-like spiritual energy. Nevertheless, his face continued to redden, and a moment later, fresh blood spurted out of his mouth. It doesn't work. Zhongxian shook his head helplessly. He had thought that he would be able to absorb the Mercury-like energy with the recent advancement in his cultivation, but his expectations had been dashed. If he attempted to force his way through, it could be foreseen that his meridians would be shattered, and his dantian would collapse. Putting aside trying to assimilate the Mercury-like spiritual energy into his zhenqi, his body would first be destroyed by the massive burden. It's a pity that I don't have the vine anymore. Zhongxian sighed deeply. If he still had the vines of the Dongshu gourd, he would have been able to use it to further alter his meridians and allow him to slowly adapt to the Mercury-like spiritual energy, but that was clearly out of the question now. Just as Zhongxian was wondering if he should seek another method, a thought suddenly arose in his head. Wait a moment, that shouldn't be. Those two otherworldly demons were able to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy, and even Vicious succeeded. Ancient sage Yang Qing had once experimented with the Mercury-like spiritual energy, and of the initial 10 subjects, 2 otherworldly demons had eventually survived the crushing pressure from the Mercury-like spiritual energy. Vicious definitely did not have the vine of the Dongshu gourd, but he had succeeded as well. Considering that his meridian network was even more perfect than the otherworldly demons, it did not make sense for him to fail. There had to be something else that they had that he did not that resulted in such a massive difference in results. Could it be the zhenqi of slaughter? If I alter the attribute of my zhenqi to that, will I be able to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy more smoothly? Zhongxian wondered. It was not as if there was anyone whom he could consult, so he decided to immediately try it out. He swiftly altered the attribute of his Heaven's Path zhenqi to simulate the zhenqi of slaughter, and in an instant, it was as if he had become a lofty otherworldly demon emperor. After altering the attribute of his zhenqi, he opened up his acupoints once more and carefully took in the Mercury-like spiritual energy. TZZZZ. This time, when the same Mercury-like spiritual energy entered his body, it surprisingly did not feel as heavy as before. Instead, it felt warm and soothing, as if gulping down a bowl of warm chicken soup. It's working. Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly in exhilaration. As the current sovereign Chen Yong, Liu Yang possessed the ability to freely alter his zhenqi to that of the zhenqi of slaughter as well, but his meridians had never been changed before. It was likely that this was why he was unable to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy. However, it was different for Zhongxian. Back when he was stripped down to his bones during his fight with the deity in the capital of the otherworldly demonic tribe, he had used the unique aura that the deity gifted to Sovereign Chen Ling in order to recover, and he had made sure to alter his meridian network to one that was more aligned with the world. With those changes, he was actually able to absorb the Mercury-like spiritual energy smoothly without any problems. After absorbing for some time, he finally felt the bottleneck that was preventing him from reaching the dimension Shatterer realm. Shatter. At that moment, Zhongxian's consciousness was within the great codex of spring and autumn in the Library of Heaven's Path, which resulted in a tenfold acceleration for the time of his consciousness. Mercury-like energy poured out of the azure in bulk, but every single bit of it was swiftly swept into a vortex that led straight into Zhongxian's body. Zhao Ya, Kong Shiyao, and the others were astonished, and they swiftly retreated several steps away from the elevated platform. They had noticed that their teacher was able to absorb the heavy spiritual energy ever since his aura transformed into one similar to an otherworldly demon, but they did not think that he would actually be able to cultivate so quickly. Under the relentless downpour of such a huge quantity of the mercury-like energy, the elevated platform was crushed under the pressure. Due to the effects of the great codex of spring and autumn, Zhongxian was able to cultivate at an unbelievable speed. Nevertheless, it took him nearly an entire day before he was able to push his cultivation up to the very brim, where he was unable to accumulate any more energy. Hong Long. It was around half a day later before he finally released the energy and took the final step into the dimension Shatterer realm, just like Zhao Ya. Surprisingly though, perhaps because he had become the world's teacher, the heavens did not call an ordeal of lightning armament upon him as a result of his breakthrough. After reaching this realm, he swiftly noticed that he was facing the same problem as Vicious and Zhao Ya. No matter how much he tried to absorb the mercury-like spiritual energy, he was unable to advance his cultivation in the slightest. It was as if his dantian and meridians had reached a sated state, preventing him from absorbing any more energy. What a pity, Zhongxian remarked with a shake of his head as he halted his cultivation and rose to his feet. The advancement in his cultivation had given him a deeper understanding of what the mercury-like spiritual energy truly was. Simply put, it was spiritual energy condensed to the extremities, resulting in its unbelievable weight. As the meridians of ordinary humans were simply too weak, it was impossible for them to adapt to it. On the other hand, the otherworldly demons possessed a superior constitution, and their meridian network was much more logical than that of normal human cultivators. As such, there was a chance that they could adapt to the mercury-like spiritual energy and enjoy a significant boost in their cultivation. As for why the Zhunqi of Slaughter was required to cultivate the mercury-like spiritual energy, Zhongxian did not have a clear answer yet, but he did notice that the two energies shared similar attributes to one another. Perhaps, the Zhunqi of Slaughter facilitated the absorption and flow of the mercury-like spiritual energy, and the similar attributes also meant that it was less likely that one's body would reject the mercury-like spiritual energy. Seeing that both Zhao Ya and their teacher had achieved a breakthrough to the dimension Shatterer realm one after another, Zheng Yang, Kong Shiyao, and the others could hardly contain their agitation. Teacher, is it possible for us to cultivate the heavy spiritual energy too? If the two of them were able to absorb the heavy spiritual energy, would they be able to do it in the near future? Zhongxian shook his head grimly. For the time being, it's impossible for the rest of you. Altering the meridians of an individual was no laughing matter. Even with Zhongxian's current means, he did not dare take the matter lightly. The reason Zhao Ya had been able to succeed was because her meridians had been replaced with the extraordinary vines of the Dongshu gourd, but even so, luck played a huge part as well. Many complications could easily have occurred, such as her succumbing to the pain or her body rejecting the vines of the Dongshu gourds. On the other hand, Zhongxian had only managed to alter his meridians because he was already reduced to a skeleton, and he had the recovery energy from the deity that had allowed him to swiftly heal his body. Otherwise, just trying to recover would have been a pain in his backside, let alone making use of this opportunity to alter his meridians. Without such fortuitous encounters, it would be hard for the rest of his direct disciples to succeed as well. Hearing those words, the crowd could not help but lower their heads in disappointment. It's indeed impossible for ordinary humans to absorb this energy. The 100 schools of philosophers have tried many times, but not even the most talented geniuses were able to adapt to it. Kong Shiyao added with a bitter smile. There was no one on the master-teacher continent who knew more about the mercury-like spiritual energy than the 100 schools of philosophers. For many generations, they had guarded this seal, and within this period of time, they had already fully familiarized themselves with the nature of the Mercury-like spiritual energy. With so many talented individuals failing in the past, it did not seem likely that they would all be able to overcome this limitation anytime soon. Even though you might not have succeeded thus far, with time, your body should gradually get used to the Mercury-like spiritual energy, Zhongxian said. Based on the records from tens of thousands of years ago, the population then couldn't even survive 3 seconds in the face of the heavy spiritual energy before their meridians ruptured completely. However, the current population, including those who have yet to cultivate, can last for at least 10 minutes in the face of the Mercury-like spiritual energy as long as they don't absorb it into their body. Kong Shiyaro nodded in agreement. Those words brought a frown to Zhongxian's face. Why would that be? Allow me to take a look. By right, the situation for ordinary humans should not change by too much. Even if the green sprout wheat altered the constitution of ordinary humans, a fighter 8-dan cultivator should still be as powerless in the face of the Mercury-like spiritual energy as a fighter 1-dan cultivator, but there was actually such a huge difference over time. Could it be that the green sprout wheat had altered something else? Zhongxian swiftly spread his spiritual perception across the entire great frontistery of Confucianism, and he swiftly located some of the ordinary citizens. The green sprout wheat has not only enhanced their constitution, it seems like their meridian network has also developed in a much different manner compared to the cultivators of the master-teacher continent. Zhongxian was shocked. He did know that the green sprout wheat had strengthened the bodies of those living in the Kungsu domain, granting them the strength of Zhongsha realm at maturity, but he had never thought of checking their meridians. Over many years of development, the meridian network of the local population was starting to show some similarities to that of the otherworldly demonic tribe. This explained the significant increase in the duration that they were able to withstand the Mercury-like energy. Perhaps this is the path that mankind is destined to walk on in order to advance further. Zhongxian sighed deeply. Initially, Zhongxian had intended to find a different way for Zheng Yang and the others to adapt to the Mercury-like spiritual energy, but the sight that he had just seen changed his mind altogether. It felt like the only way to truly adapt to the Mercury-like spiritual energy was through altering one's meridians, and if Zheng Yang and the others were to go around it the normal way, it would be impossible for them to succeed in their lifetime. However, in order for them to alter their meridians, they would have to first destroy their meridian networks, but the eon of ancient sage that they would require to make a full recovery was so massive that it was not an amount that he could procure. Furthermore, what if they were unable to reform their meridians after shattering them? Zhongxian pondered deeply for a moment before asking, Xiao, where are ancient sage Yangqing and the others? Chapter 1913. Up to the Azure, the battle with the deity had reduced ancient sage Yangqing and the others to mere skeletal racks. With all of them on the verge reaching the limits of their lifespan, it would simply be a waste of resources for them to recover anymore. Nevertheless, before Zhongxian left on his self-discovery journey, he saw Kong Shiyaro sealing them in ice to preserve their conditions. Half a year had passed since then, but it should be likely that they were still alive. Kong Shiyaro also nodded in response. They are currently in hibernation. Bring me to them. I just might have a way to save them, Zhongxian instructed as he gathered a bundle of the Mercury-like spiritual energy in his hands. Those words made Kong Shiyaro widen her eyes in excitement. Knowing the conditions that ancient sage Yangqing and the others were in, all she could really do was to delay the inevitable. She thought that it was really the end of these great men who had devoted their lives to protecting the 100 schools of philosophers, but Zhongxian's words sparked a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She immediately led the way forward, and they soon arrived in a sealed room. In the room, the bodies of ancient sage Yangqing and several other ancient sages were placed side by side along a round elevated platform. Beneath the platform were various artifacts that constantly supplied the ancient sages with the vitality required to sustain their lives as long as possible. Such a method couldn't increase their lifespan, but at the very least, it was able to delay their deaths as much as possible. This was also the method they had used in order to last the past 10,000 years. Zhongxian walked right up to ancient sage Yangqing's skeletal rack, and with a snap of his finger, he released the seal cast around him. The skeletal rack slowly roused to consciousness. Zhongshe, the skeletal rack swiftly rose up and bowed deeply. I have found a way that could potentially save you. However, as I have never tested it before, I can't guarantee its success. If it works out, your lifespan will be extended, and you will enjoy a huge leap in your cultivation. However, if it fails, you'll lose your life right away. Are you interested in taking this gamble? Knowing that the other party's time was limited, Zhongxian got straight to the point. I want to give it a try. Ancient sage Yang Qing replied decisively. Since he was doomed anyway, there was no reason for him to clutch onto this straw of hope, even if the chances were slim. Good. I have a zhenqi circulation method over here that I need you to practice right now. Furthermore, while you are reforming your physical body, I want you to create your meridians according to this map I have over here. Zhongxian tapped his finger and imparted the reverse method of the simplified Heaven's Path divine art and the meridian network mapping he had drawn a while ago into ancient sage Yang Qing's head. It took ancient sage Yang Qing 10 minutes to fully comprehend the meridian network and the zhenqi circulation method. He wasn't too sure what Zhongxian was exactly up to, but he was confident that the latter wouldn't harm him. Thus, he took in a deep breath before driving his zhenqi in accordance to the zhenqi circulation method. Tzzzzzz. With a snap of his fingers, Zhongxian released the mercury-like energy he had gathered previously, causing it to swiftly suffuse the surroundings. The presence of this energy caused ancient sage Yang Qing to tense up in anxiety. Nevertheless, he gritted his teeth and resolved himself to push it through. He began absorbing the surrounding mercury-like energy using the zhenqi circulation method Zhongxian had provided, expecting to feel a crushing pressure anytime soon. But as some time passed, an uncomprehending look appeared on his face instead. When he absorbed the mercury-like spiritual energy based on the zhenqi circulation method provided by Zhongxian, he felt that the mercury-like spiritual energy was nourishing his body instead of crushing it. Delighted, he continued absorbing the energy excitedly, and within 4 hours, his physical body was already fully restored. Due to the changes in his meridian network, his body was emanating an overpowering killing intent, making him seem like an otherworldly demon from afar. Seeing that the first phase of his plan had worked, Zhongxian's eyes glowed in delight. He quickly issued the next set of instructions. Good. Now, try to push for a breakthrough to dimension shatter a realm. Ancient sage Yang Qing nodded as he continued absorbing the mercury-like spiritual energy. As his accumulation over the past 10,000 years was far greater than Zhao Ya, it took him only 2 hours to reach ancient sage 4 Dan. As a result of his breakthrough, his lifespan increased as well. With this, he was no longer at risk of dying at any moment anymore. Thank you, Zhongshe. Words could hardly describe ancient sage Yang Qing's feelings as he felt the torrent of energy coursing through his body. He quickly kneeled onto the floor to express his gratitude to Zhongxian. He was already prepared to face death after his overexertion while trying to repair the formation, but who could have thought that the other party would bring him back using such an unusual method? Not only so, he even achieved a breakthrough in his cultivation and reached a level that he thought he would never reach. The mercury-like spiritual energy sure is incredible. Not only does it hasten one's rate of cultivation, it also recovers one's body at a rate faster than the eon of ancient sage. Seeing that his guess was on the mark, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Under normal circumstances, given the limited amount of vitality that ancient sage Yang Qing had left inside his body, he wouldn't have been able to fully recover his physical body even in an environment rich in the eon of ancient sage. However, it was a completely different matter if he were to absorb the mercury-like spiritual energy instead. This type of condensed spiritual energy harnessed an incredible amount of power within it. As long as one was able to absorb it, it could heal any severe wounds swiftly. After confirming the feasibility of the method, Zhongxian unhesitatingly brought the remaining ancient sages to the elevated platform before waking them up. He warned them of the risks involved first before imparting them with the same zhenqi circulation method and meridian network mapping he had given to ancient sage Yang Qing. All of them decided immediately to go along with Zhongxian's plan, especially after seeing the method had worked on ancient sage Yang Qing. Eventually, most of them managed to take the final step and successfully reached Dimension Shatterer Realm, but there were accidents as well. 2 ancient sages made a mistake in their cultivation and ended up having their skeletal racks crushed by the heavy spiritual energy, causing them to die on the spot. Nevertheless, all of this showed that this was a feasible course of action to take. Thus, Zhongxian called his direct disciples over and asked, "Are you willing to go through any danger in order to reach Dimension Shatterer Realm?" The 8 of them nodded their heads in agreement. Without any hesitation, Zhongxian waved his hand, and all 8 of them immediately spurted blood simultaneously. That single strike had shattered all of the meridians in their bodies. Cultivate in accordance with this, and be warned that you mustn't make even the slightest mistake. Don't blame me for not warning you if you were to die in the end, Zhongxian said as he imparted them with the 2 manuals as well. Zheng Yang and the others had watched ancient sage Yang Qing's rebirth with their own eyes, so they were well aware as to what they should do. Furthermore, as they had cultivated the simplified version of the Heaven's Path divine art, they were extremely familiar with it. While they had never tried cultivating it in reverse before, it didn't take them long to get used to it. In the end, Kong Shiyaro was the first one to fully recover and reach Dimension Shatterer Realm. Trailing behind her were Zheng Yang, Wei Ruyan, Lu Chong, and Wang Ying. And 5 days later, even the weakest of them, Zhong Jiuxiao, had reached Dimension Shatterer Realm too. With this, all 9 of Zhongxian's direct disciples had become ancient sage 4-dan Dimension Shatterer Realm expert. Teacher. Seeing that they had succeeded, all 9 of them cheered in delight. Their teacher had actually accomplished a feat that even Kong Shi failed to back then. Seeing that his final job here was done, Zhongxian quickly gathered all of them together and revealed his intent to them. "I'm intending to open up the seal and enter the Azure. The circumstances up there are still unknown for the time being, and it's likely that untold dangers lurk beyond. Thus, I want all of you to stay put here for the time being and guard the Master-Teacher continent in my stead. Wait for my news, alright?" Over the past 5 days which his direct disciples had spent cultivating to Dimension Shatterer Realm, he had been pondering over his next move, and he found that his convictions still remained the same. He wanted to head to the Azure and find Luo Ruoxin. He did think of whether he should bring his students along, but he eventually decided against it, especially given the dangers he involved. "Teacher, we wish to come along with you." Zhao Wei stepped forward and declared. "No matter what kind of danger lies in the path ahead, we'll follow wherever you go. There is nothing that can make us stand down." Zheng Yang nodded in agreement. While the others didn't say a word, the look of resolution on their faces clearly indicated their stance as well. It was due to their teacher that they were able to achieve their current accomplishments. If their teacher was going to undergo untold dangers, there was no way they would be able to remain here with a peace of mind. "I appreciate your sentiments, but we can't just leave the Master-Teacher continent as it is at the moment. With the massive rebalancing in the power distribution of the Master-Teacher continent, there's no saying what would happen in the future if all of you were to disappear at once. Rest assured, once I have confirmed the situation in the Azure, I'll try to inform you all through Liu Yang's rituals," Zhongxian explained with a smile. The Azure was bound to be filled with innumerable top-notch experts, and even if he was no match for them, he was at least confident of escaping from them if he were alone. However, if he had to bring all of his students with him, he was not confident that he would be able to ensure their safety. Besides, unlike him, his students had their own responsibilities on the Master-Teacher continent, and they couldn't afford to simply leave on a whim. Take Liu Yang for example. He was the highest leader of the otherworldly demonic tribe. It hadn't been long since the situation over at the otherworldly demonic tribe had been stabilized, and if he were to disappear at this juncture, there was no saying that others would exploit this opportunity to launch a coup d'etat against his rule. If so, mankind could potentially be in danger once more. Then, teacher, you must take care of yourself. Knowing that their teacher had already made up his mind and no one would be able to sway his decision, the 9 of them lowered their heads in disappointment. "Zheng Yang, I have tempered the Dragonbone Divine Spear with the heavy spiritual energy, and it has already achieved a breakthrough to Dimension Shatterer Realm. I shall now bestow it upon you." I don't know whether other deities would try to descend to the master-teacher continent after my departure, so I'll be counting on you to protect mankind from such external threat," Zhongxian said as he passed the Dragonbone divine spear over. Due to the dimension barrier, it was impossible for him to bring any items, including his storage rings, along with him up to the Azure. Furthermore, given his current level of cultivation, the Dragonbone divine spear was indeed not of much use to him anymore. "Wang Ying, you specialize in spirit enchantment, but spirit enchantment takes time. I'll bestow the Golden Origin Cauldron to you. It'll safeguard your safety," Zhongxian said as he brought out the Golden Origin Cauldron from the myriad ant hive nest. Over the past 5 days, while this brick-like fellow hadn't managed to achieve a breakthrough to dimension shatter a realm from the nourishment of the Mercury-like spiritual energy, it was already very close to doing so. Since he was unable to bring the other party with him, it would be best for him to entrust it to his students. He took out the treasures he had on him one after another and distributed them equally to his students before heaving a sigh of relief. With the current cultivation realm of his students and the treasures they had in their possession, even if a group of deities descended at this moment, they would be able to deal with them calmly without fluster. As for Vicious, he was sealed within the Book of Heaven's Path, which could be deposited into the Library of Heaven's Path. Considering this fellow was a figure who was able to stand on equal grounds with Kong Shi back then, it might spell a calamity in the future if he were to leave this fellow on the master-teacher continent. Despite all they had gone through together, he found that he was still unable to fully trust Vicious, so he felt that it would be best to keep the latter close with him. As for the Dongshu gourd, it was hiding in his dantian, so there shouldn't be any trouble bringing it across the dimension barrier. As for his clone, he found that while the other party was unable to enter the Library of Heaven's Path, the other party was still able to enter the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn. Given that the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn formed an independent space separate from the Library of Heaven's Path, and that the clone shared the same soul with Zhongxian, it didn't come as a surprise that his clone was able to enter the space too. With this, he should be able to bring his clone with him too. With everything in place, Zhongxian looked at the formation above of him, and with a wave of his hand, he opened up a rift in it. After which, with a powerful leap, he dashed right toward the rift. Previously, the downpour of Mercury-like spiritual energy would cause a huge burden to both his physical body and his soul, but with his cultivation reaching dimension shatter a realm, he no longer felt any discomfort from it anymore. On the contrary, he felt like a traveler stumbling upon an oasis in the desert. It was invigorating. Catcher, catcher. Beyond the formation, he saw innumerable black patches of void. The shattered space between the two dimensions formed powerful spatial turbulence that tugged at him from all directions. It's fortunate that I have reached dimension shatter a realm, or else this spatial turbulence would have torn me to shreds. Zhongxian thought grimly as he trudged his way through the spatial turbulence with difficulty. This spatial turbulence was truly far more powerful than whatever he had experienced in the past. Putting aside blood reincarnation realm cultivators, even ordinary dimension shatter a realm cultivators could succumb to the spatial turbulence and end up being torn to shreds in a moment of carelessness. If not for his incredible accumulation and superior strength, even he would have difficulty trying to get past this. Nevertheless, the spatial turbulence still inflicted many glaring lacerations on his body, causing blood to flow endlessly from his body. There was no road in this passageway, and the entire passageway consisted of nothing but collapsed space. It was only through the Library of Heaven's Path that he could discern a safe passageway, or else he could have easily lost his way in this desolate space. Hong long long. Just like that, he traveled for nearly half a month. Gauging by the distance he had traveled so far, he figured that he should be reaching his destination very soon. But at this moment, a massive bolt of lightning suddenly appeared before him, sealing his pathway forward. Just as Zhongxian was wondering how he could overcome this obstacle, another flash of lightning bolted down and struck Zhongxian before he could react, causing him to black out. Chapter 1914. Just the thought of it excites me so. With a splitting headache, Zhongxian gradually regained consciousness. The first thing that came into his line of sight was a white ceiling. Swiftly scanning his surroundings, he found that he was lying on a bed in a relatively spacious room. My strength. Slowly sitting up, Zhong Xian winced from the excruciating pain with every inch he moved. He took a look at his own body and found that it was wrapped tightly in bandages. He tried to drive his own zhenqi, but he realized that the zhenqi that remained in his body had become pathetically low. Why is my zhenqi so heavy? Taking a closer look, he noticed that his zhenqi had become incredibly heavy. Even slightly driving it created a huge strain on him. It swiftly dawned on him that it was not that he was low on zhenqi but that the vast amount of zhenqi that he had previously stored in his body had been condensed into mercury-like zhenqi. It was true that such a heavily condensed zhenqi would grant him greater burst power, but the problem was that he could not even drive it, let alone use it to recover from his injuries. He quickly tried to recall what had happened prior to this. I entered the passageway leading to the azure, but I ended up getting blocked by a bolt of lightning. I was going to find a way to circumvent it when I was struck by another bolt of lightning and ended up blacking out. Seeing the mess that his body was in and recalling his memories prior to the accident, Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes in astonishment. Could it be that I am already in the azure? Since he had blacked out in the passageway, he had thought that he would wake up drifting aimlessly in there, but before he knew it, he was already lying in a room with his body fully bandaged. Could it be that he had somehow managed to bypass the lightning region and successfully arrived at the azure? This notion prompted Zhong Xian to swiftly scan his surroundings. Thus, he attempted to release his spiritual perception into the surroundings, only to end up with his mouth twitching uncontrollably. In the past, his spiritual perception could easily over millions of li, but at that moment, it was firmly stuck within his body, refusing to come out at all no matter how he pushed. What incredible spatial pressure this is. At this point, it was already certain that he was in the azure. Not only was he unable to deploy his spiritual perception, but even his flight ability had been restricted. In fact, even his usual movements had been curbed significantly due to the immense spatial pressure. Gu. Suddenly, a rumbling sound echoed from Zhong Xian's abdomen. He was hungry. Ever since he had cultivated to transcendent mortal, he had been able to sustain his bodily needs through absorbing spiritual energy and cultivating. It did not matter whether he ate or not. This was the first time in a long time that he had felt so starved. It felt almost as if his body was completely empty. Sighing deeply, he closed his eyes, and through his senses, he could feel that the surroundings were filled with an abundance of mercury-like spiritual energy. In terms of concentration, it was at least 10 times higher than what had descended back at the elevated platform of the Kungsu domain. He tried absorbing the mercury-like spiritual energy there to refine it into his own zhenqi to recover his injuries, but the next moment, his face reddened, and a mouthful of fresh blood spurted from his lips. There was a series of violent coughing, and Zhong Xian had to strike his chest several times before the stifling sensation finally lessened. Back when he was uninjured, he could still use the sheer resilience of his body to endure the backlash caused by the absorption of the mercury-like spiritual energy. However, with his current tattered body and cracked meridians, just trying to absorb the mercury-like spiritual energy made him feel like his body was going to collapse, let alone trying to assimilate it. It looks like I can only give it a try after my injuries recover a little. Zhong Xian sighed deeply. He knew that impatience would get him nowhere, so he decided to simply let things run their course. Nevertheless, the fact that he was unable to drive his zhenqi at all and the sheer extent of the damage that his body had suffered meant that he was almost no different from an ordinary human. He would have to tread carefully until he finally recovered his strength. First and foremost, I should start by finding myself some food, Zhong Xian muttered as another series of hunger pangs struck him. Struggling to his feet, he rubbed his stomach as he trudged out of the room. Hoo. Pushing the door open, he heard a series of sharp wind currents slicing in the air. Turning his gaze over, he saw a young man holding a steel sword in hand executing a sword art. While his movements were not fanciful, they carried a peculiar grace to them that made them extremely pleasing to the eye. One thing that quickly caught Zhong Xian's eye was that the young man's left leg was as stiff as a block of wood. Zhong Xian could not tell whether he had suffered an injury or that was the original state of his body, but it was clearly impeding his movements. His foundations are still okay, but his sword art is severely lacking. Zhong Xian frowned. Grab any 3-star master teacher from the master teacher continent, and the sword art that the other party executed would be even more profound than the young man before him. However, considering the difficulties in the young man's movements, it could barely be considered acceptable. Zhong Xian heaved a slight sigh, and it immediately caught the young man's attention. He halted his sword practice and turned his head over. Upon seeing Zhong Xian, a look of delight crept onto his face as he said, "You're awake." Taking a closer look at the young man, the other party seemed to be in his late teens. He was not too tall, roughly a head shorter than Zhong Xian. Using the measurement system from his previous world, the young man would not even be at 1.6 meters. There was a glaring scarlet birthmark roughly half a cheek wide imprinted on his left cheek, and it concealed part of his face. In terms of appearances, the young man could not be associated with the word handsome at all. In fact, he might be considered hideous even. "Thank you for saving my life." Zhong Xian clasped his fist. "It's nothing much. I saw you by accident, so I brought you back. I thought that you would die given the severity of your wounds, but you somehow managed to recover on your own." The young man scratched his head awkwardly as he spoke. His words were a little awkward, hinting that he was not too good with social interaction. "Third young master." At this moment, an elder walked into the courtyard. Upon seeing Zhong Xian, he was stunned for a moment before calmly bowing to greet him. "Sir, it seems like you are finally awake." Zhong Xian returned the gesture with a simple nod. He assessed the elder before him closely and noticed that the latter's clothes were stained with oil marks. The corners of his lips were a little torn, and there was a hint of fresh blood. His cheeks were also bruised. It was apparent that he had just been beaten up by someone else. The crippled young man known as Third Young Master turned his gaze over as well, and as soon as he saw the current state of the elder, his face warped in astonishment. He hurriedly rushed over and worriedly asked, "Elder Yi, what happened?" "Third Young Master, it's nothing," Elder Yi replied awkwardly. However, the young man continued staring at Elder Yi intently, clearly unconvinced by the latter's words. Eventually, under the persistent stare of the young man, Elder Yi relented and said, "The second young mistress of the City Lord Manor is here. Xueqin is here." This news caused the eyes of the crippled young man to glow in excitement. "That's right." Seeing the response of the young man, Elder Yi's face grew even redder. It was as if there was something that he wanted to say to the young man, but he had no idea how he should broach the subject. The crippled young man also swiftly noticed that there was something amiss about Elder Yi's expression. The smile faded from his face as he asked, "Does her arrival have anything to do with your injuries? Isn't the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion coming to our town to accept menial disciples 3 days from now?" Elder Yi was conflicted for a moment before continuing. Through tapping into the connections of the City Lord Manor, second young mistress Xueqin managed to acquire a slot in advance. She managed to obtain a slot in advance. The crippled young man's face lit up in joy. "Isn't that good news?" But barely after he said those words, the young man lowered his head to look at his crippled left leg, and his face swiftly sunk. "I guess that I don't stand a chance at all. Having acquired the slot, there's no doubt that she will be leaving with those from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion 3 days from now. Did she come here to bid me farewell?" The crippled young man shook his head and sighed deeply. She. Elder Yi hesitated for a long while before finally confessing the truth. "She's here to withdraw from the marriage agreement with you. She wishes to withdraw from the marriage agreement." The young man's face turned ghastly pale. His body staggered a little, and he nearly fell to the ground. "She's going to withdraw from the marriage agreement with me just because she has become a menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion?" No matter where one was, being rejected by one's fiancé was something incredibly humiliating. Hearing the conversation between the young man and the elder, Zhong Xian's eyebrows shot up. A talented young lady scorning her fiancé and proposing a withdrawal from the marriage agreement. An injured and insulted young man deciding to buck up and return the favor. 30 years the river's east, and 30 years the river's west. To think that he would encounter such a matter as soon as he arrived at the Azure. How exciting life was. This is an idiom used to refer to the cycle of the rise and decline of all powers in the world. It's famously used in the battle through the heavens by the protagonist back when he was weaker to convey that the tables would turn one day. Chapter 1915. Dan Xiaotian forget it. After pondering over the matter for a moment, the crippled young man shook his head sorrowfully. I am indeed unworthy of her. It was only a matter of time before our marriage agreement fell through. As their grandfathers were close with one another, they had heartily decided to betroth the grandchildren to one another. However, with the death of his grandfather, his clan had begun to decline. Following which, the young man himself had ended up sustaining severe injuries that had destroyed his inner breath, rendering him unable to cultivate anymore. At the same time, his left leg had ended up crippled, and no matter how many physicians he found, none of them were able to cure it. Facing such a hopeless situation, he had eventually become very pessimistic. Furthermore, he had always suffered from low self-esteem due to his appearance. Considering the difference between the two of them, he did not feel that he was worthy of her. Their difference in standing made the collapse of their marriage agreement an inevitability. Sighing deeply, the young man walked into the room and grabbed a jade box. He entrusted the jade box to the elder. This is the marriage agreement that sealed our relations together. Give it to her and tell her that we'll be strangers from this day forth. I hope that she'll be able to find someone better suited to her in the near future, the young man said. Third young master. Elder Yi's face reddened. He understood the significance of this action, and he was just about to say something when he eventually halted himself and nodded instead. All right then, he's going to chicken out just like that. Zhong Xian blinked blankly. He had thought that the young man would lose his temper, thus triggering some kind of incredible drive that pushed the young man to accomplish something extraordinary, but contrary to his expectations, the young man actually delivered the marriage agreement back just like that. This was no different from the young man putting his face out there for others to stomp on. Even as an onlooker, Zhong Xian could hardly bear to watch. However, he had always maintained a low profile, and it had not been long since he arrived in the Azure. Thus, he eventually decided against speaking recklessly. After obtaining the marriage agreement, Elder Yi turned around and left. In the silent courtyard, the third young master abruptly raised his sword and hacked it down furiously on a nearby boulder, inflicting a deep cut on it. It seemed like he was not completely unaffected by the matter, just that he had chosen to hide his emotions from Elder Yi in order not to worry him. Through the strength that he had exerted, Zhong Xian could tell that the young man was at St. Six Dan. If it was on the master-teacher continent, it would have been an incredible feat for a person to reach St. Six Dan by 16 or 17. However, judging from the earlier conversation, it seemed such a feat was below average in the Azure. Having vented his rage, the crippled young man seemed to finally calm down a little. It was only at this moment that he recalled that the person whom he had saved was standing nearby, and his face blushed in embarrassment. My apologies. I have shown you an embarrassing side of myself. Right, I haven't asked you for your name yet. I am Yao. Pui. I am Zhong Xian. Zhong Xian replied with a nod. So, it's Brother Zhong. The crippled young man said. I am Dan Xiaotian, the third young master of Baya City's Dan clan. Brother Dan. Zhong Xian returned the greeting with a nod. I heard you speaking about the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion earlier, Brother Dan. I'm just asking out of curiosity, but is it a sect? The exceedingly obvious question seemed to have surprised Dan Xiaotian as he asked, Brother Zhong, do you not know about the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? Seeing the confused look on Zhong Xian's face, he widened his eyes in realization and remarked, I nearly forgot. Brother Zhong, you aren't a cultivator, so it's no wonder you have never heard of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. The world that we live in is known as the Forsaken Continent. According to legend, the world that we live in used to be a part of the world of gods, but it was severed from it and cast away. There are 6 major sects in the Forsaken Continent, and the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is one of them. Entering any of these 6 major sects is viewed as a great honor. Countless desire to join the ranks of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Even if one enters as a menial disciple, the clan behind that disciple will be able to rise through the ranks. Back when he saved Brother Zhong, he could not feel the slightest pulsation of zhenqi within the latter's body. From that, he had deduced that the latter was an ordinary human, not a cultivator. The 6 sects were existences that no cultivator on the Forsaken Continent could overlook, but to ordinary humans, such existences were too far away from them to bother about. Considering that Zhongxian was not a cultivator, it was not too surprising that he had not heard of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. 6 major sects. Is there no master-teacher pavilion here? Zhongxian asked in confusion. Master-teacher pavilion? What's that? Dan Xiaotian shook his head doubtfully. It was just an inside joke. Judging from Dan Xiaotian's tone, it seemed like there was really no master-teacher pavilion on the Forsaken Continent. He pondered for a moment before continuing. So, the 6 sects are the de facto leaders of the Forsaken Continent. Exactly. Aside from the 6 sects, there's also a formidable power known as Ethereal Hall. It suddenly appeared on the Forsaken Continent several thousand years ago when a powerful expert founded the organization. They manage the distribution of the ethereal token, a resource that all cultivators on the continent require in order to trade for valuable cultivation resources and become true expert. Ethereal Hall? UN. The ethereal token is sold in practically all cities on the Forsaken Continent. By coming into contact with the token, one's consciousness will be brought into the ethereal hall. In there, as long as one is able to pay the price, one will be able to learn cultivation techniques, purchase medicinal herbs, raise one's cultivation, or even hire killers. It has pretty much everything that you can think of. Even those of the 6 sects use it. The ethereal token brings one's consciousness into the ethereal hall. Zhongxian was rather curious about this peculiar artifact. Brother Dan, may I know if you have that artifact here? My cultivation is weak, and my talent is severely lacking too. Even my fiancé has chosen to withdraw from our marriage agreement. How could I possibly be qualified to possess something like that? Dan Xiaotian said with a deep sigh. I apologize. It seems like I was too tactless with my words. Zhongxian clasped his fist. Following which, he moved on to other topics and asked a few other questions to gain a deeper understanding of the Forsaken Continent. While Dan Xiaotian was a little awkward in expressing himself and suffered from low self-esteem, Zhongxian could tell that the other party was actually very kind. Upon seeing the severely injured him, the other party had actually brought him back and bandaged him. From this, he felt like Dan Xiaotian was a person whom he could trust. Through Dan Xiaotian, Zhongxian learned that 3 days had passed since Dan Xiaotian had spotted him and brought him back. Strength was highly regarded on the Forsaken Continent. The Dan clan that Dan Xiaotian came from had its era of glory 20 years ago too. It had been viewed as an equal to the City Lord residents, or to be more exact, even the City Lord residents had to tread carefully around the Dan clan. Unfortunately, the accident 10 years ago had caused nearly all of the experts of the Dan clan to pass away, and his 2 elder brothers had lost their lives in that incident. Even his foundation had ended up being wounded, resulting in his current state. With the decline of his clan, previous allies swiftly turned against them, and their enemies capitalized on the situation to get back at them. This resulted in the powerhouse swiftly falling to ruins. Currently, other than him and the old servant Dan Yi, Elder Yi, there was practically nothing left. What was left of a residence that had once covered over 1,000 mu was just this inner courtyard and an outer courtyard. The Dan clan had truly become a shadow of its former self. If not for the marriage agreement between him and the City Lord residents, it was likely that they would not even have had this much left. However, with the second young mistress backing out on the marriage agreement, even the final restraint stopping the enemies of the Dan clan from making a move on him would vanish. Then, everything would really be over. I see. Zhongxian shook his head. Strength was the foundation of prosperity. Without sufficient strength to protect itself, a power, no matter how prosperous, would eventually fall into decline. Brother Zhong, I think that you should have also gotten a rough idea of my current situation. I was hoping that I could tap into the opportunity in 3 days, when the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion recruits new menial disciples, to possibly allow the Dan clan to make a comeback, but it seems like the situation is completely hopeless now. Furthermore, with Xueqin backing out of the marriage proposal, I'm afraid that this place won't remain safe for too long, Dan Xiaotian said with a bitter smile. As the saying goes, a child from a poor family matures early. The many difficulties that Dan Xiaotian had gone through together with Elder Yi over the years had taught him the callousness of the world. It was truly a miracle that he had preserved his kind soul after all he had been through. Brother Zhong, since you are already able to move, I think you should leave as soon as possible. I wouldn't want you to be implicated in my affairs. As he spoke, Dan Xiaotian took out 2 specially crafted golden coins from his pockets and placed them into Zhong Xian's hands. These are ethereal coins, a currency accepted by the ethereal hall. While this isn't too much, it should cover a few meals. You are too kind. Seeing how Dan Xiaotian was still worried about him despite his difficult plight, a wry smile crept onto Zhong Xian's lips. He looked at Dan Xiaotian intently for a moment before saying, "Brother Dan, can you execute your swordsmanship for me once more so that I can have a look?" Chapter 1916 Humiliation. You want me to show you my swordsmanship? Dan Xiaotian was slightly bewildered by Zhong Xian's abrupt request. To be honest, Brother Dan, I examined your swordsmanship earlier, and I realized that your ability to summon your strength and the momentum of your strikes are a little lacking. So, I was wondering if I could take a look. I might be able to find a solution to those problems. If you are able to advance your swordsmanship over the next 3 days, it might be possible for you to be accepted into the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as its disciple, Zhong Xian said with a smile. With his eye of discernment, he was able to discern the flaws in Dan Xiaotian's swordsmanship and come up with solutions to resolve them. The reason he wanted Dan Xiaotian to display his swordsmanship once more was to test if he could use the Library of Heaven's path there. Brother Zhong, do you understand swordsmanship? Dan Xiaotian asked with a frown. I know a thing or two. Zhong Xian nodded. That's amazing. Well, I have already given up hope on becoming a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, so there's no need for you console me. Dan Xiaotian glanced at his crippled left thigh. Nevertheless, if you are knowledgeable in the field of swordsmanship, Brother Zhong, I would be more than happy to exchange some insights with you. Ever since I have become unable to cultivate, I had to figure my way out bit by bit, so my progress has been rather limited. Dan Xiaotian's low esteem had been exacerbated by his sudden inability to cultivate. As a result, even though he had devoted himself to learning swordsmanship, he did not dare display it before others, let alone find a sparring partner to test his skills on. Perhaps it was because he viewed Zhong Xian as an ordinary human, he did not feel that much lesser than him. Thus, he had no qualms exchanging insights with the latter. Who? With a flick of his wrist, Dan Xiaotian's sword sliced through the air and pierced forward. Wang. At the same time, a book materialized in the Library of Heaven's Path. After flipping open the book and browsing through its contents, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it seemed like the Library of Heaven's Path could be used in the Azure. Previously, when Luo Ruoxin placed the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn into the Library of Heaven's Path, the latter had gone through a major upgrade. Most likely, it was this upgrade that allowed the Library of Heaven's Path to peer into the heavens of the Azure without much trouble. How ludicrous. Dan Xiaotian, you are practicing your swordsmanship. Do you still think that the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion will take someone like you as its disciple? While Zhong Xian was still deep in thought, a cold sneer sounded from the outside. Following which, 2 figures walked in with widened strides. The first figure was a young lady who seemed to be around 15 or 16, roughly the same age as Dan Xiaotian. She was dressed in a light yellow dress, and her eyes were filled with pride and smugness. Her chin was slightly tilted up in a condescending manner, reminiscent of a self-important noble standing before a bunch of peasants. She was the one who had spoken earlier. Behind her was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was dressed in a simple buttoned shirt, and he had a sword tied around his waist. As he approached, one could feel overwhelmingly sharp sword chi emanating from his presence. Third young master. Elder Yi quickly rushed in behind those 2 figures, and with a look of indignation and guilt on his face, He lowered his head and spoke in desolation. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop them. Dan Xiaotian swiftly halted his swordsmanship before turning to look at the young lady before him. At that moment, he was so agitated that he stumbled on his own words. Shu Xueqin? Enough. Looking at Dan Xiaotian with disgust in her eyes, the young lady waved her hands impatiently and said, You know why I have come here, but instead of coming out to welcome me personally, you dispatched a lowly servant to send the marriage agreement over. Did you think that this matter can be resolved that easily? You want to back out of our marriage agreement, so I had Elder Yi give it to you. What more do you want from me? Dan Xiaotian's face reddened in anger. What I want from you isn't much. I just need you to announce to the entire city that you were the one who chose to back out of the marriage agreement of your own accord because you feel that you aren't worthy of me. It was after a period of careful deliberation before my father finally decided to respect your opinion and end the marriage agreement. By giving me this mere sheet of paper, are you expecting me to tell everyone that I, Xueqin, refuse to marry you? How could I allow the noble city lord manor to have such a stain on its reputation? Xueqing harumphed coldly. If others heard that she had broken off her engagement with Dan Xiaotian because she had successfully become a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, it would surely stir up a huge controversy. This would be detrimental for her in building up her reputation. However, if she could get Dan Xiaotian to back out of the marriage agreement instead, she would not have to sustain the slightest smudge to her reputation. Seeing everything from the sight, Zhongxian could not help but shake his head in disapproval. She sure is vicious. It was one thing for this Xueqing to back out of the marriage agreement, but to think that she would even want Dan Xiaotian to announce it to the entire city. While backing out of the marriage agreement, she still wanted Dan Xiaotian to become the bad guy. How incredibly cheap she was. With a ghastly pale face, Dan Xiaotian clenched his fists as he glared at Xueqin coldly. It went without saying that Dan Xiaotian had also figured out what Xueqi was up to. Overwhelming indignation seeped in through his entire body. This was utter humiliation. It was as if the other party was preparing to smack his face while asking him to hold up his face for her. But the problem was that there was nothing he could do about the situation. He was completely helpless. Dan Xiaotian, the second young mistress, and I didn't come down here to negotiate with you. We are here to pass down an order to you, the middle-aged man who had come with Xueqing said impassively. Within 3 days, you are to make this announcement to the entire city, or else, be prepared to pay the price. Who are you? Dan Xiaotian asked as he glared at the middle-aged man coldly. I am the swordsmanship teacher of the second young mistress, Xueqin, the middle-aged man replied proudly. Xueqin? I know you. Seemingly having heard this name before, Dan Xiaotian's eyes widened in astonishment before he shook his head in self-mockery. I sure am honored to have the head instructor of the City Lord Manor pay a visit to me personally. May I know what the price I will have to pay if I refuse to abide by your command is? As the head instructor of the City Lord Manor, Xueqin's strength was not to be underestimated. He was, in fact, an ancient sage 3-dan expert. Well, it's very simple. Xueqin waved his hand nonchalantly, completely unaffected by Dan Xiaotian's provocation. Over these years, the Dan clan has offended quite a few people, isn't that so? You should also know that if not for your engagement with Xueqing, you would have already died many times over. Those words were hurtful, but Dan Xiaotian knew that they were the truth. Given his weak cultivation, if not for the marriage agreement, there was no way the enemies of the Dan clan would have allowed him to live so long. Well, if these men make a move against you, do you think that you and that old man over there will be able to stop them? Xueqin shrugged coolly. Realizing the hidden intention behind Xueqin's words, Dan Xiaotian's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you going to silence us? Aren't you afraid of the possible repercussions my sudden death would have on the City Lord Manor's reputation? How would your death affect the City Lord Manor's reputation? Xueqin remarked calmly. Let me see. Our City Lord would be enraged to learn of your demise, and he would dispatch men to exact vengeance for you. As for our second young mistress, she would mourn for a long time, and eventually, she would decide to depart from this land of grief and head to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Jeji. Those words made Dan Xiaotian's heart beat faster and faster as he realized how wretched his situation was. If they really acted out this play, not only would the reputation of the City Lord Manor not be marred, it would even be praised for its compassion. At the same time, Xue Qin would also be more respected in the city for her loyalty to her fiancé. They would say that even though Xue Qin had become the menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, she had still held steadfast to her promise to marry him, but alas, as fate would have it, they were not meant to be. Fine. I'll agree to it. Dan Xiaotian's hands were clenched so tightly that his fingernails were digging into his flesh, and his joints had become all white. However, despite his indignation, he knew that the current him was completely powerless. Law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. Weaklings like him were bound to be preyed on by the strong. That is more like it. Xue Qin nodded in satisfaction. She raised her hand, and Xue Chen immediately took out a document and passed it over to Dan Xiaotian. This is the document for the annulment of our engagement. All you have to do is seal your name on it, and we'll handle the rest. Rest assured, we'll announce the matter to the entire city by today. Dan Xiaotian hesitantly reached out to grab the document before reading through it carefully. It was an official notice supposedly written by him to announce his intention to annul the engagement, and his reason behind the action was stated as well. The reason was extremely simple. He was injured, and not only was he unable to cultivate, he was unable to fulfill the role of a man, making him a true cripple through and through. In order not to stall his fiancée's future, he decided to willfully annul the engagement, and he sought her forgiveness for this. The City Lord Manor, in view of its past relations with the Dan clan, had rejected his proposed annulment of the engagement time and time again, so he had no choice but to officially announce the annulment of their engagement using such a crude method. He sought the understanding of the City Lord Manor for his abrupt actions. Xue Qin was actually going to the extent of claiming that he was crippled as a man. The overwhelming humiliation that Dan Xiaotian felt made his blood surge to his head, and he nearly exploded on the spot. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.